This guy was the most badass that ever existed. He was abandoned, left adrift at sea after his family was ambushed inside the yacht. After that, the guy trained like a monster until he reached the maximum speed of humans, and now he's back seeking his revenge. The story begins with someone saying they never imagined it would take 17 years to return to Korea. In 2 containers, names were displayed: Hujong-yu and Suyip-jin. Looking at the vases, a man says it's been a long time since he last saw his father and mother. In his thoughts, he admits there was a time he wondered how much a human life was worth. 17 years ago, 10:32 p.m., in the Gulf of Aden, a cruise ship begins to sink. The boy was extremely desperate as he looked around for his parents. The storm was growing more intense by the second. The child kept screaming, searching for his relatives. He tried to swim against the strong sea currents. At that moment, the boy notices 2 bodies floating. Getting closer, Dongwoo realizes it's his mother. Looking closer at the body, the boy notices there are various wounds scattered across it. Frozen, he's left paralyzed, unsure of what to do in that situation. Even so, the child keeps trying to wake her. However, a large wave comes toward them, causing the protagonist to start drowning. Desperate, the boy realizes he needs to get to the surface before he runs out of air. Opening his eyes, he sees several bodies scattered beneath the ship, growing more and more shocked by the entire scene. Realizing even his secretary had been shot to death, along with the head chef, the captain, and the ship's bodyguard. Suddenly, he sees a body nearby and realizes something horrifying. After all, sinking further and further before him were both his father and mother. But suddenly, someone pulls him up. An old man asks if Taha is okay. Seeing the boy is still alive, the man asks if he can move. Crying, he's overwhelmed with joy to see his grandfather is still there. Suko says it seems the heavens haven't completely abandoned them. The protagonist tells him that his parents are below them, but his grandfather says he knows, yet there's nothing they can do. He asks his grandson never to forget the words he's about to say, declaring that no matter what, the boy must inherit the Chiengu group. With that, the old man hands Taeha a pen and tells him that by bringing it to lawyer Kim, the man will automatically know how to help him. He also must remember not to trust anyone and return to Korea as quickly as possible to meet the lawyer. Even so, the protagonist begs his grandfather to at least save his father and mother. The man begins removing his life vest. The boy doesn't understand what he intends to do with it. Surprisingly, the old man puts the vest on the child, explaining that they had already been shot before the ship even sank. Inflating the vest, Suko tells Taeha to go and survive at all costs. And so the man pushes his grandson away, just as another giant wave approaches them. The storm caused lightning to tear through the clouds non-stop. After some time, all the chaos turned into an agonizingly peaceful silence. The boy was still floating on the water, opening his eyes, clearly exhausted. The boy is left speechless when he notices something casting a shadow amidst the sunny sky. The source was a large cargo ship passing through the area. Someone smiles as their face is obscured by the light. Taha was very scared and confused after being rescued. 2 guards armed with rifles were shocked to see the child still alive. One of them starts yelling for his boss, saying the boy is okay. Hearing a language different from his own, the protagonist realizes they're Italian. The man kept trying to communicate with his superior. Someone seems to give a call. While one of them complains about their boss being there again, the chubby one asks if the child can understand him. However, Taeha notices a tattoo standing out on the man's neck. With that, the protagonist realizes that given the tattoo and the weapons, these people aren't ordinary. Suddenly, the group's leader jumps down from where she was. Startling him, the woman lands in front of the boy, asking how he ended up on her ship. Her subordinate warns that the child might not speak their language. Annoyed, she orders someone to bring a translator to help them communicate. Taeha just watches them, a little nervous, not knowing how to react. But to the woman's surprise, he speaks in Italian, saying he was on a yacht that got attacked nearby. With that, she asks where this impressive child came from. He explains that he's Korean and that during a storm, his family's ship was invaded by armed men who killed his parents and grandfather. The boss says that, apparently, after being shipwrecked, he ended up on the Solerno family's ship. Confused, the boy wonders what the Solerno family is. She starts laughing at the situation as an Asian kid speaking Italian claims to have come from the Gulf of Aden in the Middle East. Pulling out a knife, the woman says it's shameful, but she can't believe it. Pointing the blade at the boy, Regina asks if there's any reason she shouldn't just throw him back into the sea. The boy doesn't know what to say to avoid that. Nervous, he tries to think of something as fast as he can. So Taeha shows the pen given to him by his grandfather, explaining that he's the grandson of Suko, president of the Chiengu group, and the son of Suyuk, Suko's 3rd son. And that because of that, instead of tossing him overboard, they could help him get in touch with his people and reap some benefits. Annoyed, Regina asks if he's really talking about the Chiengu group. She notices that this is the most successful conglomerate in South Korea, and apparently that brat is part of the family. Because of that, the leader orders her subordinates to check the news related to Korea. While both of them search for something related to what the boy said, the woman asks if the child speaks any other languages. He informs them that he speaks Cantonese, English, Japanese, Arabic, Spanish, Hindi, and Esperanto, claiming to be fluent enough for basic conversations. One of the men says he found some news from Korea. Regina smiles, realizing that this is fascinating. She says that if the boy wants to contact someone from Korea, he can ask them. But the boy remembers what his grandfather had said, telling him to look for lawyer Kim, since the man would know how to help him. The protagonist states that he needs her to contact someone outside of his family, in Seoul, at 1:12 a.m. Someone answers the phone, asking who it is. The person says they're calling from abroad, notifying that they will only speak in English, asking if he is lawyer Kim. Regina says that from the photo she sent, the lawyer must have realized she has the precious grandson in the group with her, asking if she should send him back to Korea. However, the old man questions what she means by that. She makes an offer of $10 million, saying they should meet in the Panama Canal for the exchange. However, the guy claims he's too busy to negotiate, so he makes a counteroffer, offering $1 million. Putting his drink down on the table, he picks up a microphone that was nearby, swearing and stating there'll be $1 million. While dancing with some people, the man says he'll pay $1 million if she kills Taha, ordering the woman to kill the boy and send him video proof within the next 5 minutes, so she'll receive the $1 million as a reward. Regina asks what would happen if he didn't send her the money after the deed. While everyone watches, the lawyer assures her that he only needs to tap his phone 3 times to send such a small amount. Besides that, if she doesn't do it, Kim says he'll reveal to the press that they were responsible for the attacks. Ending the call, he tells his superior that there's no need to worry, as he's contacted some mercenaries close to them. Thanks to that, the Chiemgu group now belongs entirely to them. The boy was still paralyzed by everything he had heard. After all, that man wants him dead within the next 5 minutes, making him even more frightened. The woman says that apparently that's just how things work. Because of that, her reason for keeping him alive is gone. Terrified, Taha starts begging them not to kill him, but Regina claims that he's no longer a member of a wealthy family. Besides, they're probably already preparing his funeral, asking if the boy knows what that means. Claiming that this is quite common in her world, people kill others to take their assets and achievements. Horrified, he complains about why his uncles and relatives are planning to kill his entire family. Both guards talk among themselves, saying that their boss won't kill him, even though she's having fun provoking him. Trembling, he can't believe he survived the sea only to die at the hands of people he doesn't even know. Wondering what Chiemhu really means, and if it was worth killing his parents and grandfather for the positions they held. Suddenly, someone enters the room saying they're under attack. The guy informs them that 3 patrol ships and a heavily armed military helicopter have appeared. She asks if it's Interpol, but the man says no and explains that they're ignoring all radio transmissions. Regina doesn't understand what's going on. After all, it would have to be someone crazy to do something like that. Looking at the child, she finally understands the culprit, realizing that those Koreans must have contacted those people to find that boy. Out of nowhere, Taega stabs his right hand with a pen. No one understands what the child is trying to do. He says that the Chiengu group will never give her the money. Furthermore, the woman has nothing to gain from killing him. The Solerno family's trade leader is surprised to see the boy's reasoning. The protagonist begs to join them, claiming he will be loyal for the rest of his life if they help him get revenge. The woman wonders how he learned the Solerno insignia. The crazy woman starts laughing hysterically. Excited, Regina tells Matteo to get ready because the show must begin. Before leaving, she asks if the boy understands the weight of his words, asking if he truly wants the power of revenge, even if it means staining his hands with blood. Remembering that his grandfather had said that no matter the means, he must inherit Chiengu at all costs. Determined, the protagonist simply nods in affirmation. With a smile, she says that barking dogs rarely bite, but even so, this was quite interesting. The crazy woman kicks the door open, telling them to follow her, claiming that from that point on, the boy's life belongs to the Solerno family, so he will live and die for them. Therefore, he must watch closely, because that is his future. Tata truly observes, frozen by what he sees. With that, 17 years pass, and he finally returns to Korea. The boy asks his father and mother to protect him as he takes his revenge. However, he seems surprised by something, quickly turning to look behind him. He jumps to the side as several shots hit the area. Several soldiers had arrived and fired many rounds at Taha. Getting out of some vehicles, someone asks if those insects don't even know how to aim. A Chienhu group security guard and manager tells them to look for the senior administrative director, stating that he doesn't know the man, but he must be insane to think he could kidnap a Chienhu director. One of the subordinates tells the manager that they found the car they were looking for. He tells everyone to be careful when opening the trunk, as the director is still alive. While ordering them to check his injuries, a large explosion occurs. The guy gets angry at the audacity of placing a bomb there, but suddenly half of his men have their heads decapitated. When he finally looks back, the rest of them are also killed, extremely quickly. Taha had defeated them all in an instant. The man notices a small cut on his waist. Nervously, he sees that it was thanks to the protective vests. Trying to attack the protagonist, the bald man calls him a little insect. However, the boy tells him not to think he's the only one with something to say. Quickly, he lands another strike on the back of his opponent, launching an attack that splits him in half. As he collapses, Jang wonders what that was, unable to understand how that man managed to do such a thing, complaining about who that monster really is. On the other hand, the protagonist didn't seem pleased by it. He begins to clean his daggers as he walks away, heading toward a luxury car, and grabbing a bag that was in the back seat. He then walks to the trunk. Wincing, the director begs Taeha to let him go, claiming he was only following orders. This was the former lawyer Kim, the one who had ordered his death, stating that he had no reason to kill the chairman. However, the boy opens the bag and throws several bills on top of the man, saying that this is the 1 million. After all, that money probably was never delivered to him. Frightened, the man asks what money Taeha is talking about. However, the director remembers that day. The protagonist takes a lighter from his coat, stating that thanks to the fact that he died that day. As he throws the lighter, he says he was reborn. With that, Kim begins to burn alive. Coldly, Taeha just watches with indifference. After that, he calmly picks something up. Putting the cigar in his mouth, the protagonist mentally tries to speak to his parents and grandfather, apologizing for having taken so long, pleading with them not to worry and just to find peace, saying that from that day on, he will carry all their pain. After some time in the middle of the city, a modern building stood out among the others. The protagonist was moving quickly, determined to do something. Some men questioned where he thought he was going as they prepared to shoot to stop him. However, the madmen simply killed the two of them quickly. Even so, Taeha didn't seem bothered by the setback. He continued walking calmly through the hall. Seeing the situation, a man sat on the floor, terrified by the scene. Frightened, he asked the protagonist who had sent him there. The man said they were part of the Chiengu group, claiming that he wouldn't be safe after doing all that. While cleaning his blade, Taeha said that this was Holdings, a private security company subcontracted by Chiengu. Its main function was protecting directors and board members outside of working hours, all across the Gangbuk area. During their downtime, they stalked journalists or people who reported on Chiengu. They kidnapped, assaulted, and even killed them. In other words, they were contract killers. The people who had been captured were completely devastated and desperate. The protagonist simply threw one of his daggers to the old man. After that, he told everyone to use it to free themselves and to make sure they never saw him there, so that the bindings were cut. The three were still confused about everything that had happened. The old man got up and brought the knife back to the boy. Running, they thanked him as they left. On the other hand, the company member ordered everyone to come back. One of the escapees looked back as he heard the man complaining. The fat man asked who he was, wondering if Taeha was part of their family. Removing his mask, the boy said no and explained that he just wanted to have a slightly more private conversation, saying that he needed the schedule of everyone on the board, from the directors to the president. The man said he didn't know, and even if he did, he wouldn't say. His family and himself would be dead if he did. The protagonist said it looked like he valued his life, stating that he'd start with his eye and that when he felt ready, he should raise his hand. In a building, a large screen outside displayed news about a celebrity. Meanwhile, several people sat on stairs, experiencing homelessness. Due to the heat, even a cicada lay dead on the ground. Breaking the silence of the place, someone seemed to be in a hurry. As he walked, Taeha noticed that his cigar would draw too much attention, wondering if he should try Korean cigarettes. The avenue was very busy at that time. He said he had finally returned to Korea and that so far, everything seemed normal. But he noticed his country was going crazy, with various ads for loans and insurance being broadcast everywhere. A politician was giving a speech claiming he would use his power and influence to eradicate the epidemic of crime and violence, declaring that from that day on, his war against crime would be publicly declared. However, his speech was interrupted by someone pointing a gun at him. It was said that in 1990, the president was killed during his campaign against organized crime. Since then, no one had opposed criminal groups, turning the country into a place consumed by violence and money. The boy walked the streets deep in thought. Thus, the Chienhu group allied with criminal organizations to bribe the media and suppress competitors. They invested in entertainment and sports, making the population lose interest in politics, so much so that even a dog could become a candidate. Even so, people kept saying that the Chienhu group was a company that benefited the people. Taeha entered a store calmly. The clerk welcomed him. Both he and another guy asked for a pack of this. They stared at each other for a moment, unable to understand how such a coincidence could happen. A bit irritated, the protagonist decided to change his choice. However, they both had the same idea and asked for a plus at the same time. Once again, they looked at each other suspiciously. Awkwardly, the woman said that unfortunately, they only had one pack left. Taeha sighed deeply, clearly annoyed by the situation. As he left, he asked the clerk to give the pack to the other man, saying he'd be fine without it. The man kept staring as the boy walked away. After the man made his purchase, he found the protagonist outside, who politely asked for a cigarette. However, he asked if the boy couldn't go to another convenience store. But Taeha explained that it had been a long time since he was last in Korea, so he wanted to try it quickly. The guy gave up trying to avoid him. As he handed over a cigarette, he said he couldn't believe someone wanted to try that tasteless thing. As they walked, the man said he'd get a fine if he smoked there, so he recommended waiting until reaching a smoking area. Observing him, Taeha admitted that when you've been in the mafia for about 17 years, a simple glance is enough to assess a person. Assuming that guy was strong, just as strong as the ones he faced abroad, he wondered if people like that were common in Korea. Also leaving, the protagonist declared he hoped not to meet him again. After some time, that same man arrived at the place where the protagonist had committed the massacre. massacre. While smoking, he calmly observed one of the bodies. Kneeling down, the guy took a closer look at the corpses, noticing they were all fatally wounded by stab wounds from a blade similar in length to a sashimi knife. Putting out his cigarette in the pool of blood, he picked up his phone and called his employer. His boss reminded him he had already said not to call at that hour. The man asked if he had a meeting later. He advised that the best choice would be to cancel the appointment. After all, the assassin who killed director Kim might be after him. The man, sipping his wine, calmly asked what was going on. His subordinate explained that he had gone to the security company and found them dead. From the injuries, it looked like a solo attack. Besides the assassin not being ordinary, it was very likely he knew exactly where the meeting would be held. But his boss said that an emergency family meeting was a tradition in the Chiengu group, asking if his subordinate really believed someone would invade a meeting known only to family members. He said he sent him so he could hunt that man discreetly. Lost in thought, the man realized the wounds from that knife reminded him of something, remembering the protagonist asking for a cigarette from his hands as he took the cigarette, stating that if he doesn't use knives, there's no way he could have gotten all those scars on his palms. With that in mind, Hunmin asks his boss if there's anyone in his family who's good with knives. Laughing, the man says those people can barely slice an apple. Besides, everyone is present except for the children. So he offers another 100 million for Hunmin to guard the place and ensure its safety. Leaving the office, Hunmin says he'll go to the meeting. Still, he asks for the security to be reinforced. Annoying, his boss just says he understands. Handing his phone to another employee, the man mutters that lunatic is just a gangster and still thinks he can give him orders. As he walks down the hallway, he straightens himself up and gets ready for the meeting. Arriving at the meeting, he greets his boss and asks when the president arrived. Talking on the phone, Hunmin informs the leader of his gang that he plans to help the Chiengu group for one more day before returning. However, he's called a traitor. Instead of getting angry, he asks if his boss has been drinking. He explains that they offer him another 100 million for the job, claiming only an idiot would turn it down. Also, there seems to be a dangerous assassin on the loose, yet he notices the protagonist hiding in the alley. Quickly, Hunmin ends the call and says he'll explain the details later, looking toward the boy. Feigning casualness, he asks if one cigarette wasn't enough. Taeha says that finding someone of his caliber near the site of the incident isn't a coincidence, claiming it was a good idea to follow him. Smiling, the man says it's been one hell of a day. First someone bums his cigarette, then follows him around. He admits he can't believe he didn't notice him, saying it's the first time something like that has happened. Walking toward him, the protagonist says that before they begin, he'd like to ask one thing. He asks whether the man is working with the Chiengu group. On the other hand, Hunmin asks if he wasn't listening to the conversation, saying he's just helping them temporarily. At that, the boy gives him a deadly stare. He draws the two daggers from his back, and then immediately clashes his blade against the enemy's weapon. They exchange glances, sizing up each other's skill. Thus begins a frenzied exchange of blows. However, Hunmin jumps into the air, rising above the protagonist. He swings his weapon to strike. To his surprise, his bat is sliced into pieces. Seeing that, the gangster wonders when that even happened. What's more, Taeha had vanished in the blink of an eye. Then his opponent grows anxious as he realizes something. The positions had flipped, and now the one in the air was the protagonist, who quickly prepares to end the battle. With a touch of fear, Hunmin admits that Chiengu got themselves into serious trouble this time, wondering how they became targets of a monster like that. Taeha falls toward his opponent, wielding his blades. The gangster doesn't know what to do now that he's without a weapon. The protagonist lands a blow, knocking the man to the ground, already getting ready to leave. While wiping the excess blood from his knife, he heads for the exit of the alley, leaving Hunmin's body lying there. However, to his surprise, the man asks if the boy is joking. Even wounded, he still wasn't dead. He asks if, even after all that, the protagonist is really just going to walk away, stating that he'll regret letting him live. Sheathing his dagger, Taeha explains that he has his own principles, warning that if he were with the Chiengu group, he'd already be dead. That the man should stay out of his way, otherwise the next time he hears him helping his enemies, he won't be so kind. Besides, if he can't accept the fact that he was spared, he can just take it as payback for the cigarette. Still lying on the ground, Hunmin smiles as he realizes that a simple cigarette saved his life, admitting that this time it was very cheap. A little later, a car speeds down the street. Obviously, the protagonist was the one driving. For some reason, he seemed both irritated and in pain. Seeing a wound around his waist, Taeha says that at least the cut wasn't deep. While driving, he says that at least he can still move. He steps on the gas. He only needs 32 minutes. He says that finally the revenge he planned for 17 years will come to fruition, with only 32 minutes to go until its completion. Once again, the boy is consumed by memories from his childhood. His mother begs him not to look, while his father uses his body to shield them both from the bullets. However, extremely scared and worried, he runs toward his father. The man asks what she's doing, telling his wife to grab the boy and run. So his mother picks Taeha up so they can try to get away. But then the ship starts shaking violently. Even the assassins struggle to keep their balance. His mother puts the boy outside the door. She tells her son to find a life vest and jump into the water. With a smile, Hujung says he must survive. One of the men says it's annoying and reminds them he said to detonate the bombs only after killing everyone. Looking in his direction, the protagonist is surprised they speak Korean. The man's face was completely covered with a mask and goggles as he aimed at him and his mother. Hujan panics and tells Taeha to run as fast as he can. The boy starts running frantically through the ship. Terrified, the child was overwhelmed with fear. He runs, gasping while crying uncontrollably. After that earlier explosion, part of the yacht was already on fire. But then, another bomb goes off. Because of this, the ship starts to sink even faster. Back to the present in the secret annex in Gangbuk. The CDO of the Cheon-gu Group's department store asks if they really found the person who killed Director Kim. However, Jae-sung says it was probably a crime of passion. After all, the director had 2 mistresses in secret. His sister says that's disgusting, but he replies that it's ironic coming from someone who has several lovers. Jong-won asks what Director Kim's role was in the company's share quota, stating they'll need to make an announcement soon. But suddenly, someone slams their hand on the table, catching everyone's attention. The man tells everyone to be quiet. Guho tells his son to speak. Chang says 2 employees were found at the scene, but they didn't have much to say and were dismissed. Also, it was confirmed there were no other witnesses. The man says they were just subcontractors, so they don't know much in general, and the police ensured the incident wouldn't leak. Suddenly, his father throws a glass of wine at his head. Everyone at the table is left confused by what just happened. The old man asks where the Ojong gang is. Chung was visibly irritated by that. Even so, he smirks and says they don't seem to know anything, even sending Huimin, their 7th in command. Still, the old man smashes a bottle on his son's head. He says that even after 24 hours, he hasn't found out who the killer is or where he is. Instead, he brings news about a gang. He says that if the former president and Suyak hadn't died 17 years ago, someone as incompetent as him would never have stepped foot there. Along with the wine, the man's face was now completely covered in blood. Regardless of what happened, Chum assures them he'll find him within the next 12 hours. The rest of the family sees that neither of them has changed, and it bothers them all. Juvia asks why he's so harsh with the eldest. After all, he's still his firstborn. However, her brother says it's not out of hate, stating that it's definitely out of fear. Grabbing a cloth, Chung immediately asks his subordinate for his phone. While wiping his face, he searches for something on his phone. He asks where his men are. His assistant says they're already ready. The guy says it's exciting, saying he's eager to see how big this entrance will be. On a highway at night, the protagonist was heading toward his goal. Taeha admits he's always kept an eye on the Cheon-gu Group. 17 years ago, the day he was accepted into the Solerno family. Even before his grandfather's funeral, Guo became the new chairman, taking over all the shares and seizing the position. Taking advantage of the chaos from the failed war on crime and forming alliances with factions like the Ojong gang to grow his power. Even though that was the beginning of the Cheon-gu era, they still hold meetings with official members during moments like this. This had been an old family tradition since the days when his grandfather was still alive. Neither the system nor the traditions had changed. Everyone had killed to reach their positions within the hierarchy created by Suko, willing even to murder their own parents and him. One of the guards was monitoring the cameras, wondering whose car that was approaching. He asks his superior if the members are expecting any guests, but this is denied. He reports that there's a car heading toward the front gates. Also, it doesn't seem to be slowing down. Seeing that it's probably some lunatic, the head of security orders the barriers to be raised. With that, some containment stakes begin to rise from the ground. However, the protagonist accelerates even more. After all, he doesn't need tricks up his sleeve to take down people who have been protected their entire lives. Taking off his belt, Taeha says there's no point in making elaborate plans. His car's front end is completely destroyed from the impact. Even so, he leaps out with his blade in hand. He states that the only thing he hopes is that they haven't forgotten about his family, so he can say it to all of their faces. The security guards look at the intruder in fear. The boy quickly takes down all of them in a single attack, and declares that he's back. Confused, they ask what that loud noise was. They question why it keeps getting louder. Moreover, it seems to be coming from the front gate. Unlike the others, Chum looked confused but confident. His uncle tells the guy to go over there and check out what all the commotion is about. However, surprising Jong-won, he says there's no need. All the guards who were inside the hall point their weapons at the family members. The oldest of the sisters asks what's going on. Guho, irritated, asks if they're seriously trying to mess around at a time like this. However, his son calmly stands up while wiping his mouth. The old man asks if he's really going to go through with it. With a smile, Chum claims that his father always expected this to happen sooner or later. That was the reason his father was always angry with him, because he was afraid he'd end up like his grandfather. With a terrifying look, the madman says that after all, the one who killed his grandfather and uncle was him. Meanwhile, the protagonist passed through the gates, saying that his revenge was finally about to begin. The guards point their weapons, asking if this is some kind of ambush. Jae-sung asks if his nephew has gone mad. They question what the guy is doing, claiming that he should never point a weapon at his own family. However, Chung states that he's not doing anything. Still, they keep cursing him and saying it's clear what he's trying to do. Looking at one of the guards, Jui asks if he's really going to betray them for that kid. Even though he was her personal bodyguard, Yangmin apologizes, making it clear he's abandoning her. Even the second son's bodyguard says it's nothing personal, but the rewards for betrayal were just too tempting. On the other hand, one of them says that if they had at least gotten a raise, none of this would be happening. The only person who remains silent is Chang's own bodyguard. The guy's father says he can understand the others betraying them, but he doesn't understand why his own son would do this. He asks if his own guard will really turn his back on them. Junsu simply watches without moving or saying a word. The man says he isn't paid to protect him personally, but rather the Gu group. Jong-won asks if the guards really think they'll gain anything by doing this. He tries to keep threatening them, but a gun is placed against his head. His own bodyguard kills him in cold blood. With that, the two remaining brothers become desperate and beg for mercy. However, gunshots echo through the hall as blood spreads everywhere. John hands the cloth to his subordinate, walking calmly toward his father. The old man admits he already expected something like this to happen someday, ever since the day his other son died of acute leukemia, and shortly after that, his wife asked for a divorce without wanting a single cent. Trembling with rage, he says he always suspected Chiang was behind everything, and because of that, always kept his distance. Spinning the gun, the guy says that for someone who ordered the deaths of his own father and brother, Guvo talks too much. Putting the gun to his head, the man asks the old man who it was that sent his father and brother out to sea. He asks what else he could have done. If he hadn't killed everyone, Suyuk's son would have inherited the presidency, and they would have never made it this far. The psychopath comes closer and asks why his father never declared him the future successor. The old man becomes more and more terrified by it all. On top of that, his son was staring at him with a frightening look, while Google claims that if he had done that, the boy would have killed him even sooner. He doesn't deny that he would have killed him earlier, but says he's a little upset to hear it out loud. His father assures him that even if he kills him right there, he will never become president. But Chung interrupts, saying he already knows that. After all, power transfers through political or violent coups aren't recognized. That's a clause made by the committee. Because of that, the guy says it's a shame. He explains that the person making all that noise outside isn't one of them. The president asks who it would be. As he shoots his father, he explains that it's a young master who waited 17 long years for this day. The guards were firing at the intruder. They tried to surround him since the assassin didn't have a firearm. The protagonist remembers that the Central Security Force is made up of those who protect the executive members, so they hold high-ranking positions. Therefore, he assumes the bodyguards will be much stronger than the ones before. He stops running for a moment. Changing the direction of his charge, the boy says this won't be a problem. He starts moving toward the enemies in a zigzag pattern to dodge the bullets, using one of the guards' bodies as a shield. Desperately, the man begs them not to shoot since he'll get hit. But the guards don't care and open fire. Leaving one of the security men terrified, his weapon is cut in half. In an instant, Taha is able to defeat them all quickly. The leader orders his men to evacuate the president as fast as possible. However, the protagonist throws his dagger at the guy. Still, one guard manages to intercept the blade. A man with glasses asks why they're making all that noise, questioning if they can't do this quietly. 3 department heads show up to try to stop him, but that little group is simply ignored as the protagonist kills the others. One of them says he can stop him alone and tells his comrades to stand back. However, even though he's extremely strong, Taha is struggling with the wound he received earlier. With each passing minute, the wound seems to be getting worse. Snapping back to reality, he realizes his opponent's fist is already dangerously close to his face. So, his only option is to block the attack as he's thrown backward. He manages to regain some balance, but unexpectedly, a shadow looms above him. The man asks how he dares attack that place, and worse, gets distracted while invading his territory. However, the protagonist agrees and says it's no time to be distracted by wounds, launching a strike straight at the man's chest, startling his companions as they witness the sudden defeat. Quickly, Taya throws his remaining dagger at the 2 Gore left. Neither of them looked as confident as before. Surprisingly, the intruder had already landed a hit on the man who had defended against his ranged attacks. Sholo can barely keep up with him with his eyes. Grabbing one of the knives he had thrown earlier, the protagonist slices off the head of the last department head. Thanks to that, he had defeated all the outside guards. As he walks toward the entrance, he spots his second dagger, picking it up calmly as if no one else were there. Wiping off the excess blood, he admits it took longer than expected. Even so, the place is eerily quiet. He wonders whether they escaped through a secret passage he didn't know about. Without knowing what awaits him, the boy begins to walk through the house. Finally arriving at the room where everyone was dead and only Chong remained seated amidst the blood, he welcomes him. He also congratulates him for making it that far, asking if he wants to sit down to catch his breath and rest a little. Seeing all that, even a protagonist doesn't quite understand what's going on. Observing Jae-sung's body with a bullet wound in the middle of his forehead. The same goes for his aunt Ju-hui. Even Jong-won had met the same fate. The current president was also dead. Standing up, his cousin says he's in better shape than he expected, claiming that modern assassins should take better care of themselves. Formally greeting him, Chang asks if he recognizes him. On the other hand, the protagonist simply says the man's name and mentions that he's Guho's eldest son. Laughing, the madman says he doesn't remember them being so close that he called his father by his first name. Suspicious, Tayana simply observes that strange behavior. His cousin says he stayed there because he thought it would be disrespectful not to greet him, and also because he needs to explain a few things. In informing him that if he doesn't want to sit, they can remain standing, since it won't take long anyway. Xiang asks if the boy remembers that day 17 years ago, the day he was rescued by the Italian mafia. Interrupting him, his bodyguard says that the helicopter is ready, saying they should leave soon as it's too dangerous to stay. Annoyed, the guy says he had asked her to only call him once he was done talking. However, Taha is suddenly surprised by something, clearly showing he wasn't expecting that at all, saying he recognizes that voice, the voice of the one who killed his family 17 years ago, remembering the man who pointed a rifle at him and his mother, the person who complained about the early explosions while laughing beneath a mask. Extremely angry, Taha asks if he was that worm. The madman begins trying to hold back his laughter, saying there's not much left to say, telling the protagonist to stop talking to him so casually. After all, it's making him feel like killing him. Charging forward, he dares the guy to try, since his goal from the beginning was to wipe out the whole family. But his cousin starts saying there's a saying that goes, when in Korea, act like a Korean, telling him to change his speech. Annoyed, Taga starts trying to understand what exactly is going on. Realizing that Chang knows he survived 17 years ago and also knows about him being a Solerno assassin. He wonders why he waited until his return minus 17 years after the event to make his move. Try and get the boy's attention, the guy asks him to really listen, saying he's about to begin. Only then does Tyra realize that the madman doesn't want to pull off a coup. He wants to blame him for the attack, claiming he led it so that he can successfully take the presidency. Joniuk tells the young master that they don't need introductions. The protagonist simply raises his dagger. The bodyguard starts shooting at the boy. However, the assassin manages to deflect all of them, using his blade to redirect the path of the projectiles, quickly closing the distance between them. However, another guard lands a harsh blow on the boy. Even though he knew there would be more, he couldn't predict the strike. Unlike the other, the man introduces himself as Juno Park. Avoiding being cornered, the young master swiftly moves back, stopping in front of his opponents. Wasting no time, Junia begins shooting him again. Admitting that he's faster than the rumors claimed, he could dominate track and field if he went pro. His partner blocks the protagonist's escape. Even, he gets a little nervous about the situation. Juno asks if flexibility is the young master's secret to success, quickly launching a frantic series of attacks. Ta realizes they are strong, completely different from the ones he fought outside. However, if it weren't for that injury, he might even be able to fight them without issue. Noticing that Chang seems to have let his guard down, and that this might be the only chance before guard Jumpsuit arrives. Besides, if the woman beside him is Daein, there are 3 guards in the room, yet there were 4 members at the meeting. Unexpectedly, his thoughts are interrupted as Juno prepares to attack him. Thanks to the reflection in his opponent's pupil, Taha identifies the 4th guard. Yaman was holding a sword, preparing to strike him from behind. To the surprise of them both, he vanishes between the two. They can't understand how that's even possible. Kneeling on the ground, the protagonist realizes this must be the last one. The guy complains about being reflected, blaming Juno, but his companion says that if it were that easy, the boy would already be dead. Reloading his weapons, Joniuk says he can barely imagine the bonus they'll get if they kill that guy. So both he and the guard with glasses use their weapons to shoot at the assassin. Seeing that situation, Chung says out loud that it's hard to follow a fight that involves both range and close combat, noting that they were trained specifically to defeat him, since rumors of his inhuman speed circulated through Interpol. Admitting he even thought about killing him with a bomb, the story of him dying in a battle would bring him greater fame. Juno positions himself in front of the boy, intending to stop him from escaping. Joniuk says it doesn't matter how fast he is. It's all over now that Taha has been cornered. With that, the guard uses his brass knuckles to try to land a blow. The protagonist didn't have much to do, only watching the attack coming at him. His cousin thanks him for the show while smiling malevolently. After being struck by the enemy's fist, he slammed against the wall, causing it to crack entirely. Flashing back to 4 years ago, Regina was scolding him and asking what the hell that was, saying she told him to take care of the traitor, not use him as paint for the walls. Even she started vomiting upon seeing the scene. Still yelling, the woman says that with his speed, he could have done it silently. Recalling the day they saved him, she says she understands his anger, since Lorenzo always treated him well, but killing someone like that will only spark a thirst for revenge. That's why, as his mentor and spokesperson for the Solerno family, Regina asks him never to do something like that again. However, the protagonist didn't seem happy or remorseful. Still, he says that this way, people will never forget. Confused, she asks what Taha is talking about. He explains that if they kill traitors silently, their deaths won't serve as examples, saying that everyone needs to know what awaits them if they betray the family. Rumors must spread in exaggerated and distorted ways, thus gradually reducing the number of traitors, because otherwise it'll always be an endless battle. The woman asks if he chose the path of violent deaths to prevent greater bloodshed. Aside from where he was standing, everything around him was stained with blood. She says it's absurd for such a thing to come from a boy standing in the middle of a river of blood without a single drop on his face. Interrupting her own thoughts, Regina says that apparently being an assassin really doesn't suit him. Back to the present moment, Juno freezes as a glint appears in the middle of his chest. The guy starts coughing up blood while that glint keeps shining. Even Xiang and his bodyguard are surprised by it. The protagonist had slashed the guy brutally. With a threatening look, he faces his other opponent. opponents. Frightened, Yaman quickly points his weapon. However, in an instant, his eye is pierced. After being struck, the man admits to himself that they underestimated this guy. Besides his speed, he's strong. Moreover, those who truly saw his skills never lived to tell what they were like. Even while showing all that ability to keep fighting, Taeha was even more injured, and his wounds were getting worse. Jung-hyuk was desperate. No one told him his strength was this immense. However, Junsu appears and calls out to the woman, asking her to take the master outside, claiming he'll follow soon. Seeing that, the boy is surprised, noticing that his cousin is trying to escape. He shouts the guy's name, slashing both of Jung-hyuk's weapons and rushing toward the elevator. Chang leans his head out to see what's happening. With uncontrollable rage, Taeha demands to know where he thinks he's going when their standoff isn't over yet. However, blocking the entrance stood Junsu, who greets the young master. Taeha is surprised to see that the president's bodyguard had arrived. Still, the boy leaps forward, demanding he get out of his way. But, surprisingly, the man stops both blades with a single hand. Preparing to punch him, the older man notes that the boy has grown a lot, admitting he's impressed. With that, the man lands several blows all over the protagonist's body. Almost all of Taeha's ribs end up fractured. Consequently, Taeha begins to spit blood from all the damage. Crushing the blades with his hand, Junsu declares that, unfortunately, this will be his end. Landing a punch in the same spot, he sends the assassin's body flying. However, the old man is surprised to see that his clothes have been torn. Looking at his subordinate, he orders Jung-hyuk to get up, saying he knows he's fine. Nervously, he admits he thought it was over for him. The old man warns that the building will explode soon, telling him to grab his partner and leave. Lying on the ground was the protagonist, who appeared to be dead. Reaching the rooftop, the president's bodyguard walks toward the helicopter. Chung asks if he completed the job. The man confirms and says he'll blow up the building as soon as they take off. Junsu says he'll handle the preparations for takeoff, but the man tells him to just keep the door open and get them in the air. Putting on his headset, the bodyguard warns that they'll fly straight into the helicopter, so he suggests closing the door. However, the psychopath insists he needs to see it, claiming he waited too long for this moment. With that, the helicopter begins to ascend as Chang stands in front of the door. He calmly watches as he smiles, cursing and saying he always hated that house. As he complains about how annoying and hypocritical his family was, Daeun and Junsu exchange looks. Suddenly, the madman remembers when the protagonist said things weren't over between them. With a grin, he calls him a poor child. After all, he lived for his revenge and ended up facing the same fate. He asks if they knew that the word family comes from the Latin famulus, meaning slave. Holding the detonator in his hands, he asks everyone to witness how he will change Chingu from now on, completely destroying the mansion of those secret meetings. Inside, Taeha was lying on the floor, unconscious. Still dazed, he realizes that the sound is from the helicopter and acknowledges that it's all over. Changing his mind, he declares that there's still time. Meanwhile, Chung watches the explosion. Throwing the detonator down, he says they really wrap things up with a bang. As the protagonist jumps amid the flames, the lunatic says he's going to lie down a bit since it's so hot, ordering his subordinates to head straight to headquarters, but Taeha strikes him with his knife. However, he only manages to hit his calf. His cousin starts screaming in pain. Both guards rise, alarmed by the situation. Furious, his cousin calls him an insect and demands to know what he's doing. The protagonist asks if he really thought he could escape after destroying so many families. Because he's hanging from the knife, his weight causes it to tear Chang's leg even more. As the blood gushes, Taeha says he will kill him no matter what. Daeun grabs her weapon and asks her master to step back. However, the lunatic takes the pistol and says he'll do it himself. Pointing the gun at his cousin, Chung asks if he really thinks he's the hero of this story. Insisting that he is the main character, he calls him a thug and tells the boy to die. As he falls, Taeha manages to avoid the fatal shots, though he is hit elsewhere. As a result, he goes into free fall. Immediately after they close the helicopter door, his bodyguard calls the hospital, reporting that they have an emergency. The protagonist was falling from an absurd height. Luckily, he crashes into a tree, slowing his descent. Even so, he hits his back against the wall of the house. Then he lands on a truck, rolling down near a stream. Someone passing by on a bicycle ends up seeing the scene. The person stops and looks toward him. It was one of the victims Taeha had rescued from the security company earlier. The guy notices that it was the man who had saved him. Given the state of his body, he wonders if he arrived too late, but then he hears a plea for help. Looking again in Taeha's direction, he tries to look more carefully. The protagonist was asking for help, barely able to stay conscious. Even extremely wounded, he kept saying it wasn't over yet and kept pleading for help. On a messaging app, someone had sent an 11-minute voice message. The person was requesting backup, stating that the guy had refused the breathalyzer test 3 times and kept insisting he was Congressman Kim. That man was typing something while listening to the audio of former director Kim using his influence to threaten the police. He asks someone if that voice and name were clear enough. The person questioned where the director was at that moment. The young man replied he was probably at the police station giving a statement and would soon head home. His partner seemed a bit hesitant, so the guy offered 200 and asked if that was enough to catch a big figure from the majority party. For a while, the only notification was that the other person was typing. But to his surprise, the counteroffer was 30. Naturally, he was extremely frustrated, claiming that it was worth way more. However, the buyer said that it wasn't even election season, so no one cared about those old men. The guy said it seemed like the buyer didn't understand the current market, explaining that a regular person was worth 1x, a celebrity 10x. But if it was someone related to Gu, the value was 1,000 times higher. Taking a deep breath, he realized everything revolved around the Gu. After some time, the radio reported an accident at a tower. Not interested in that information, the guy turned the radio off. He was getting ready to leave. But instead of heading to the street, he was in a restaurant. The owner was already getting things ready to open. The woman warned the boy that he'd be late if he stayed there. The boy said he was fine and would make it on time if he went by skateboard. So she told him to eat something. However, if he did, he really would be late. Suddenly, someone appeared and said that this chef should stop playing games. A guy entered saying the owner should sell the place before they stopped being polite. Baksu asked the boy if he agreed with him. The lady questioned if they were already there in the morning to collect money, claiming that delinquents really knew how to stay busy. She told the boy not to worry and to head to school, saying nothing would change anyway. Even though he was irritated, there was nothing he could do. Grabbing a knife, the thug said she shouldn't say those things so quickly, claiming she was already 2 months late. The guy told the woman to sell the building and gather as much as she could, stating that their interests aligned. She said she'd never sell that place for crumbs, telling him to at least learn basic arithmetic before coming back. Meanwhile, the kid was at his station waiting for his transport. Exhausted from it all, he just sighed, unsure of what to do. He admitted that in his district, the fights over redevelopment were out of control, with disputes between groups like Xiangu and Ojan. It was a very neglected area, turning into a lawless land where small gangs tried to exploit the people living there. People like him and that lady had nowhere else to go. Upon returning, the restaurant owner had several bruises on her face. Still, she just asked him to clean the tables. Worried, he asked her what happened to her face. A customer said he saw some Yaburi men leaving earlier, visibly upset. The man said they were probably trying to pressure people into selling their buildings for redevelopment. She told him not to worry and asked the kid to put his backpack in the back of the shop. The boy did as she asked, but angrily threw everything aside. Frustrated, the boy muttered that he really needed to do something. He remembered that before his father passed away, Dr. Youngsuk was a close friend of his. She had once been a professor at a medical school, but crossed paths with the Ojan gang. Still, she took care of him. None of it was her fault, just like with the restaurant, even if her food was good and the dishes always well made. Interrupting his thoughts, an idea came to his mind. He recalled what that guy told him on the phone. After all, someone from the Chingu group was worth 1,000 times the normal value. So the boy messaged him again. The guy asked if he had any news. Even though he was nervous, the boy told him everything he knew, sending some images that proved his story, claiming that one of the security guards of Chingu's directors, Juhak, was hooking up with Mio, the leader of ladies. Still very afraid, he waited for the buyer's response. Not quite understanding, the guy asked what the boy wanted with that info, but quickly remembered the values mentioned earlier. The next day was a sunny Saturday. Some men in suits approached and asked if he was gray. He confirmed, but as he looked back, he immediately realized he shouldn't have done that. The guy punched him in the stomach, knocking him out and taking him to a van. As he was being taken, Gray finally understood why they paid so much. After all, it was just bait. The boy was tied up and sitting inside the security company's office. The leader said that at first he thought he was just an annoying informant, but in reality the kid was very good. He asked where he got those images, wondering if his father had hidden them before dying. The guy asked if the brat was Jingu's son, one of the people who reported Xiangu. Seeing that, Gray gave a slight smile. Taking off his watch, the guy asked if he thought it was funny. Then he punched the boy in the face, asking if that was funny too. Still hitting him, the man asked if he had more files like that one, hurting the boy more and more, throwing him to the ground and cursing him nonstop. Even so, Gray couldn't hold back his laughter and kept laughing. Still laughing, he said the old man looked like a piece of trash he used as a toilet, claiming that if he had more, he would have already sold them. The fat guy ordered his men to bring the hammer. The man threatens to rip out all of the boy's teeth until he understands that this isn't a game. But luckily for him, one of the guards calls the old man. His subordinate reports that a central dispatch order just came in, stating that they need to provide security for an emergency meeting. Standing up, he says that if it's really a level 1 priority, that means they should go right now. So he orders them to tape the boy's mouth and lock him in the room. Kicking him inside, the fat man says he'll be back to finish this later. Inside, there was already an elderly man along with a woman. Still on the floor, he says his father was a fool. Driven by his ridiculous sense of justice, he didn't even try to expose Xiangu. He just died in a car accident with his mother, and instead he should have just gone into hiding to live a peaceful life working for them. No matter how significant the information his father had, as long as he remained defenseless, it would all be in vain. However, they begin to hear the guards asking who that person was. Gunfire and screams suddenly mix together. Even the leader panics, shouting for his men to kill the intruder. Everyone starts to panic, not knowing what's happening. Suddenly, the large door in front of them bursts open. The protagonist hands them a knife and tells them to use it to free themselves and get out of there. Then he assures them that none of the three ever saw him there. They don't fully understand what just happened. They start to leave, thanking him for the help. That's when the boy looked around and behind him one last time. Staring at the bodies, Gray wonders if that man did all of this by himself. Sometime later, he finally returns home. Young-suk asks what happened to his face and where he had been all that time. She gets more and more upset, demanding he explain, but Gray says nothing happened. With a smile, a girl tells her not to worry. The boy heads to his room. The woman watches him, clearly concerned. As soon as he enters his room, he collapses onto the floor. Still shaken, the boy wonders if it was the Ojang gang that sent that man there. After all, they had guns, but even so, he killed them with just 2 knives as if it didn't matter. While opening his drawer to search for something, the boy keeps wondering if that guy was sent by someone. Closing it, he figures there might be something more behind all of this, suspecting it might be a revenge plot. He remembers the moment the department head mentioned his father, questioning if he had more files related to Chiengu. The boy admits that no matter how important the information is, it's worthless unless you have the power to use it. As he accesses the files, Gray says he needs power. The man says it's practically impossible to find him among those folders just by his face. But then he remembers something one of the subordinates said when he mentioned an emergency meeting. With that, he remembers the level 1 priority code accessing the Chiengu Partnership Directive. Seeing that it was also noted among his father's folders, he says he finally found it. It stated that in the event of a significant incident, the executive members would begin a meeting at the Bugek Mountain Annex. However, even with all that information, the actual location wasn't provided. Giving up, Gray says he doesn't care anyway. He doesn't even know that guy. Even so, he says not everyone who considers Chiengu is considered by them in return. On the police radio, the massacre Taha was committing is reported, with multiple confirmed victims. The extent of the damage is unknown, but it's confirmed that the mansion was secretly used by Chiengu executives. Getting up, the boy realizes it can only be that man, so he decides to go there, grabbing his bike and leaving in the middle of the night, even though he doesn't know who that person is, nor his reasons for doing all of this. The best decision he can make right now is to go there. That's when he saw someone hanging from a helicopter. After following the sound of gunshots and screams, the boy went in the direction where the person might have fallen. However, upon seeing him in that state, he thought the man was dead, seeing that blade in his hands and his cry for help. He notices his face as he declares that it's not over. Gray is shocked by all that strength of will. Sometime later, he arrives home screaming for his adoptive mother. As always, she was working. Alarmed, the woman asks who that is and what happened to him. Desperate, the boy begs Young-suk to save that person. Time passes. The protagonist is already better and asks who he is and why he was saved. Gray introduces himself and says he buys and sells information, claiming that he's been looking for something specific lately, saying that he hoped to find someone like him. Doubting his words, the protagonist asks if someone like him could really be a data broker. The boy continues, saying he's more like a wholesale information dealer, always providing great intel to his clients. Besides that, his main clients are other info merchants and the financial sector of Uedo. He explains that he nearly died after falling into the Chiengu's trap, thinking he was about to meet a fellow informant. Taha asks if the boy was one of the hostages from that day, wondering if he was able to recognize him even after seeing him just once. Gray confirms he did, saying he wants to win an award for the youngest data broker or something like that. With that, the protagonist starts looking around, noticing the things the boy owns. Then he asks how many days he's been there, and the boy tells him it's been 4 days. The man wonders if he really slept that long. Still, he calls for Gray and asks if this supposed broker could find someone for him. But unfortunately, he has to admit he was bluffing, saying it was hard enough just finding him, and he'd need another broker for that. Moreover, finding someone requires a lot of money, and above all, he'd like to ask for something in return for saving him, since he spent a lot on medical expenses. Ignoring all the rest, the protagonist asks if what the boy's trying to say is that he can't find him. Gray asks what the man would do if he couldn't. However, Taha just turns his back and says it's fine. Grabbing his jacket, he thanks the boy for his help and says he'll erase him once everything's settled. The boy asks if he's really leaving just like that, but the protagonist says he still has matters to take care of. As a final piece of advice, he tells the boy not to interfere or try to stop him, since this won't end with just one kidnapping. Scared, Gray just sits back down in his chair, but soon he smiles, realizing that apparently that's how things work. After leaving the boy's room, he notices a strong smell of pork and wonders if that place is a restaurant. Surprising Taha, Young-suk says the boy shouldn't be up yet. She says he was hit by 22 caliber bullets, making it possible to stitch him up, but his fractures aren't kept still. He'll be lost even if a doctor helps him again. Politely thanking her, the protagonist says she must be the doctor who saved him and assures her he'll repay her. But she says she's not a doctor, claiming she owns a gukbap restaurant, and asks him not to come back there if his stitches open. So the protagonist heads outside. Looking around, he wonders if this is a market. Ignoring these things, Taha picks up a phone. Answering it, he says it's not his phone. Gray explains his broke, and until it's fixed, he can keep that one. He says there should also be a box in his pocket with earbuds, asking the protagonist to use them. Taking the device, Taha is surprised by its size. The kid explains about the battery, connection, and mic, also warning that the first button on the shirt is a camera. The protagonist says he was very clear, claiming the boy will die if he gets involved with him. However, to his surprise, the boy asks why he's exterminating the Chienbu family. The kid asks him not to be surprised. After all, even though Korea is a mess, something like that wouldn't go unnoticed. The whole country went into chaos while he was unconscious, with news saying the entire Chienbu family was a victim of terrorism. Taha asks why the boy wants a favor from him, even knowing that. The kid explains that in that neighborhood there are a lot of power struggles between Ojeon and Chiengu to gain redevelopment rights. Besides the two gangs getting closer to that area, there are many other issues making life harder. Even so, since the protagonist's problem seems more urgent, he'll help, but in return, he wants help in the future. Until everything is resolved, they can't lose contact. But if Taha refuses, he'll have to hand him over to Chiengu. Obviously, the man doesn't like that at all. However, he says he wants to see what the brat is made of. Sometime later, he's already walking through a busier area, heading to a fancy building. Taha had gone to a kind of bank, where he had a private vault. There, he opens one of the drawers looking for something. Gray admits he didn't know a company like that existed in Seoul, asking if they could be tracked through it. But the protagonist explains that these companies work based on trust, so they would never consider making deals with other businesses. He says people usually go there to hide jewelry or sins, making it the safest place possible. Seeing this, the boy realizes that this guy is apparently prepared to go undercover. He gets thoughtful, watching Taeha's actions. Confused, since the assassin didn't have any firearms and a knife wouldn't be enough. Many drops of sweat start to fall to the floor. His body was getting heavier, making it hard to keep a neutral face and also feeling like he was being stabbed. Feeling the same as when Rae-juning used to beat him. The protagonist asks if the boy found the guy he asked him to look for. He asks if the CEO of the company Night Move, Piljeon, is the broker who helped him enter Korea. Apparently, he worked in Europe, became famous in the field, and is now looking for a smuggling ship to go to China. Great explains that border pressure increased after the man did what he did to the Chienbu family. The protagonist tells the boy to announce to the merchants that a ship is available with rates 10 times higher than normal. His companion asks what he'll do when he finds that guide, wondering if Taha wants to leave with him. Putting his knives back in their sheaths, he says he's going to kill him. The reason he almost died that day was because someone leaked his information. The only one who knew where he was Piljeon. Coldly, the protagonist says that traitors must die. Later, in a church, he admits he doesn't care if it's a longtime friend or not. A hooded figure enters the chapel. Approaching the confessional, the man calls for the priest and asks if they could talk. Using a specific phrase, each brings water to their own mill. Piljeon complains about how stuffy that place is, questioning why they're meeting in a sacred location. He says it might not seem like it, but even so, he's a devout Catholic. However, the so-called priest only asks where the money is. The informant reaches into his bag for the money. Showing the 100 million won, the man says it would have been more profitable to exchange that for $10,000. Changing the subject, Piljeon says he needs to know something. After all, the country is full of frauds like him, so he can't trust the priest. Gray warns that there are many men outside. Suddenly, several people enter holding melee weapons. The man says it's very strange that someone managed to get a ship that not even he, a person who works with information, could find. Claiming that the rule in that line of work is clear. If someone lies, they must pay with their life. Admitting that the protagonist must be ready to face the consequences of his actions. But leaving the man startled, Taeha says he could hardly believe that he wouldn't recognize his own friend's voice. Piljeon can't believe what he's hearing, saying they had assured him they had killed him. The man quickly realizes there's no point in talking. Even so, he claims he was a fool and should have suspected something as soon as he noticed the password was an Italian expression. Trying to explain himself, his friend says he lost everything because of gambling, ended up in Korea, and racked up massive debts in Chiengu's casinos. As he reaches for his weapon, Piljeon tries to convince him that he wouldn't have said anything if he'd known they would try to kill him. But before he can finish his sentence, Taeha bursts through the confessional wall and drives a blade through his throat. He panics, trying to stop the bleeding in his neck. The men outside ask what's going on. Through the camera on the protagonist's shirt button, it was possible to see the man's body and all the blood that had spread. Obviously, Gray is terrified. Despite all his injuries, enough to make most people barely able to walk, Taha was still going to fight. Leaving the booth, the protagonist says that Piljeon surely ordered them not to bring firearms to avoid conflicts. The psychopath tells everyone to pray before they begin, asking them to inform God that they'll soon be with him, stating that it doesn't matter whether they're hired hands or subordinates of his friend. Gray didn't know what to do seeing all that. The protagonist says that just the fact they're armed with bats and knives is enough for him to consider them a threat to his life. In that case, there's no reason for him to hold back. They ask what that guy can even do with a broken arm. One of them charges to strike, saying that apparently there's money in the confessional. The protagonist simply prepares to take them down. The boy admits that the assassin's broken arm isn't the only issue, as he has fractured ribs and gunshot wounds. However, he moves smoothly as he dodges the attack, and with a single motion he pierces the back of his opponent's neck, already shifting to attack the next one. Again, he dodges the blow while slashing the man's throat. Quickly, he throws a dagger into another man's neck. One of them runs in to try and stab him. However, John Wick uses the sling to immobilize the enemy. In a flash, he lands an elbow strike with his other arm. With that, Taeha had defeated everyone who came at him in an instant. He explains that when someone gains the upper hand in the beginning, it's hard for the opponents to keep their composure. Considering all that money waving in front of their eyes, it was obvious adrenaline would take over. Even so, among them, there was still someone else. Someone had something they shouldn't, but some of those guys charge at him. The protagonist takes a simple step forward and, in doing so, disappears before everyone's eyes. Using his speed, he rushes past the men. Obviously, his target was to eliminate the one most capable of hurting him. The two who had stepped up to attack him are completely confused. Even Gray can't understand what just happened. With that, the weapon drops to the ground after his rush. He calmly starts turning to the others, asking who's next. Despite all that chaos outside, the church didn't seem affected. In the parking lot, only one car was parked at that hour. Gray was inside, unable to believe what he had just seen. Supposing that man doesn't even seem human, since even with a battered body, he still did all that. Suddenly, Taeha calls out to the boy and asks if he can hear him. The protagonist asks the kid to go to the confessional and retrieve a bag of money, since he no longer has the strength for it. The brat asks, frightened, what he's talking about, but the man says he knows he's in the area. After all, he warned him about the men before they even showed up. Gray doesn't know what to say in that situation. Even a bit nervous, he simply accepts the mission. So the boy gets out of the vehicle and heads toward the church. With that, the boy walks up to the door. A bit hesitant, he opens the doors. In front of him, the church was completely stained with blood and bodies. Sitting on one of the pews was the protagonist. He says he's up there. Even more nervous, Gray begins to walk. Arriving at the booth, he notices the body of the protagonist's former friend. He feels a bit sick after all. There were bodies scattered all over the place. The boy says he called a cab, saying it should arrive in the next 10 minutes. However, looking at his companion, the boy realizes Taha is in really bad shape. He asks what's wrong with him, saying he'll call Yongsuk and ask her to prepare some medicine for them. But the madman stabs his phone. At that moment, Gray is frozen in fear. Taking off a glove, the protagonist says that when he woke up, his clothes and phone had been changed. But the strangest part was that his gloves were still on his hands. Obviously, the boy just listens without saying a word. On Taeha's hand, the mark of the Solerno family was drawn. Looking at the boy, the man claims he knows who he's dealing with. Gray just nods his head, saying his name, his father's name, and the fact that he's the grandson of the late president of the Chiengu group. He's the only Asian member of the Italian Salerno Mafia, around 20 to 30 years old, with a bounty of 5.5 billion on his head. The boy insists he wasn't plotting against anyone, saying not even the lady knows, claiming he just needs his help. Taeha asks if that amount is worth more than the risk of losing his life or earning the reward for his head. Gray tries to say that the reason he and his adoptive mother live in hiding is because of the Chiengu, but the protagonist cuts him off, assuring him that the smartest choice would have been to turn him over to Chiengu instead of going through all of this. Recalling the conversation they had earlier when the kid said he wanted to win a prize by becoming the youngest broker. Noticing that the reason his career was stagnant despite being capable of more and even getting involved in the field, something nobody in the business does, is due to his lack of experience. That's why top informants are usually older. With that, he asks if Gray wants to step into a much bigger arena. A little later, in a large modern building, two people were walking down the hallway while one of them told the other to only answer what was asked directly. Huimin gets upset and assures he would never say anything that could put Ojong at a disadvantage. His companion says people from the gang aren't exactly known for being well-spoken. Even irritated, the guy can't deny it. The two enter as the man apologizes for making that person wait. Back at the chapel, Taita praises the boy's work, saying he'll fulfill a favor, but also wants them to work together afterward. He says Gray will be risking his life and won't have an easy death if he's caught. However, he could become the best if they work together. The protagonist says that's a promise. After all, he will crush Chiengu once and for all. The leader of Ojong admits he didn't expect them to call so soon. After all, they understand that Chang must be busy with the funeral of his relatives. They'd affirm they wouldn't have gone anywhere before getting in touch, but the man raises his hand, signaling them to stay quiet. Both are afraid of what might happen. The strange man makes a little hand gesture, asking for silence. With that, he begins to nod his head affirmatively. A kind of speaker starts playing music. He raises his clenched fist, making a sort of resistance pose. The two members of the Ojong gang don't understand what it means. Still, someone starts clapping. The guy accompanying Human says it's a shame they arrived arrived just as the performance was ending. Chang asks if he knows that piece. The man says its exact name, but notes the composition seemed disjointed, assuming maybe it was due to his performance. That clearly doesn't please the lunatic. He orders his bodyguard to turn it off. While Dayan uncovers her ears, the man says that was a 6th grade piano competition, assuming he never practiced again. Moreover, all the relatives who went to watch him that day are now dead. The man asks if they know what happened, assuring them that if they had known who was coming, they wouldn't have been so defenseless. However, Human insists he did warn them, advising they should have even canceled the meeting since the assassin wasn't just anyone. While saying it was Chang who didn't heed the warning, Chang cuts him off, telling him to put away that cigarette, claiming he was the one who knew best. This visibly angers him. Chang says it was a traditional emergency meeting of his family, something that could be canceled on a whim, claiming that's why he paid 200 million won for him to deal with that man discreetly, without alerting the other members. The man rests his knee against a sort of cane. While touching his leg, he says that instead of handling the assassin, they suffered losses and now he'll even need to use that. With that, the man says he can't help but wonder how Human is still alive, even though all the other guards died. The guy says he already explained, saying that assassin kills according to his own rules and he didn't fall within them. With a smile, the lunatic says maybe the rule of a terrorist is to avoid friendly fire. Obviously, this infuriates Human. He tells the guy to stop barking nonsense, asking if they really think he put the honor of his organization and parents at risk. Chang says it must be nice to have parents to support you, stating that even if you wanted, his are already 6 feet under. Suddenly, the other Ojang member adjusts his glasses, preparing to step in. The man asks who is responsible for handling the so-called terrorist. The guy assures it shouldn't even be questioned. It was Mr. Junsu. The girl once again looks at the old man with suspicion. Huimin's partner asks the bodyguard directly. The man obviously confirms immediately. However, even he seems a bit suspicious. He says he understands and asks what Xiang wants from them. The lunatic claims he doesn't care about money or anything like that. He just wants to make sure to stay quiet about the incident. And if anyone asks, Human has never seen the assassin before. The guy doesn't understand why Chi and Gu are trying to bury the matter. His companion lights a cigarette, asking if that's really all they want. Xiang tries to make him put the cigarette out again, but Junsa touches his shoulder. Startled, the man looks at his bodyguard, who speaks in his place and assures both that it will be enough. The Ojang representative says he needs some time to digest everything, asking if the bodyguard would also like a cigarette. But the man thanks him and says he's quit the habit. However, Chang slams the table, getting increasingly furious. He asks if they're not afraid. After all, he'll be the new president soon, questioning what that old worm is doing. The guy strings together insults and tells that little shit to know his place. Standing up, he says that's what his boss would say, and that's why he's in that seat. Bidding farewell, the man addresses the bodyguard directly, saying they agree to the terms. Throwing the cigarette butt on the floor, the man tells them to have an ashtray next time, and preferably a wet napkin too. With that, the three are left in the room in deafening silence. Jiang stays quiet for a few seconds, not saying or doing anything. Huimin says he really is something else. After all, he dismantled all of Qingu's arrogance using only his words. Adjusting his glasses again, he says that's his role there since, apparently, Chang doesn't understand how things work, claiming that the former president truly taught him nothing and deserved his fate for not dealing with that brat sooner. The guy is in disbelief, asking if he's really trying to say that. Calmly, the old man claims the incident was probably a coup planned by Chinom to seize the presidency. The elevator opens and they resume walking, declaring it's essential that they find the assassin who attacked the Qingu group. Huimin tries to say the guy is dead, but his companion assures him that's not true. After all, Junsu is strong but never kills people. At the moment, he asks the old man that he confirmed his suspicions. The guy is even more amazed by all the twists. He declares it's unlikely the man was hired by Chiang, since Junsu lost many men. The assassin was merely used in the end. Huimin says that when he met him, the so-called terrorist said he hadn't been to Korea in a long time, asking if they should try to bring him to their side, maybe even managing to take Qiangu down completely. However, the old man says that would be good, but even so, if they find him, they must kill him. The guy can't understand the point of everything earlier. Still, the old man admits what irritates him is the fact that Chang called him thinking Huimin isn't a match for the assassin. That's why next time they meet, he must show them who's boss. Japel admits he's not the biggest fan of Ojang, but still hates seeing one of his men get beaten. Back inside, while some ice cubes fall into a container, Chang assures there's one thing he's become very good at. Thanking his father, he asks if either of them wants to guess. The room still had the broken coffee table and both bodyguards remained motionless. Pouring the whiskey into the glass, the man says he's great at picking up on subtle cues. He says that when that old man asked if Taha was really dead, the room felt like everyone was holding their breath. Sitting back on the couch, Chang says his bodyguard assured him he had finished off his cousin. However, Taga jumped and injured his leg. Besides that, his body hasn't been found to this day. Bringing the glass close close to his lips, he pauses for a moment. With a terrifying gaze, the man questions if Taiha is still alive. Junsu asks if the guy is suggesting that he let the former young master escape. The old man says he was the one who shot the boy from the helicopter. Chang states that if he had done his job properly, that wouldn't have been necessary. The bodyguard admits the boy was stronger than he expected. Furious, he throws his glass at the counter. He says it's time to move on now. As he leaves, the guy says his priority is the council meeting, claiming he needs to win their votes in order to join the committee. The psychopath says that whether Taha is alive or not, the old man cannot betray him, asking President Junsu if he's not right. The old man assures that he never goes back on his promises. They head to the rooftop toward the helicopter. Yaman was already waiting for them. Xiang is surprised to see that the guard managed to survive. The guy says this is different from what he was promised, asking to reconsider his transfer. He claims to have served the Qiangu family for a long time, so he shouldn't be reassigned to be just a director's bodyguard. Annoyed, he says if he had known this would happen, he would never have betrayed his former boss. The lunatic approaches and asks who told the guard he could get his ass kicked. Before doing anything, Yaman looks at Dayan, as he simply lowers his head. His boss tells him to be grateful he wasn't discarded after his terrible contributions. Even so, he yells out, calling for Junsu. The old man tells him to stay calm for now, saying he will contact him later. With that, the helicopter starts to lift off. Yaman just watches them. Somewhere in a less developed area of the city stood Ms. Young-suk's restaurant. Taiha says he now understands why Gray was able to identify him since his late father was a researcher at the company. The boy says that with the tattoo on the back of his hand and the search for the 20-year-old Asian tied to the Qiangu massacre, it all made sense. Assuring it's not so bad, the protagonist compliments him, saying it wasn't bad at all. His adoptive mother says it looks like he has a lot of free time. Yang-suk says that for someone from Qiangu to come back for revenge, he must have plans, stating the boy shouldn't just be sitting around chatting. Making Gray spit out his food, he asks if she would betray him just to keep him busy. At that moment, the psychopath mutters to himself that traitors must die. His friend tries to lighten the mood, but the woman says it's only fair. She says there's no way a killer who lived his life for the mafia can easily trust others. However, the protagonist says he was just handling some matters that would be more important in case of emergencies. He asks the lady not to worry, saying that anyone hated by Qiangu or Ojang is not his enemy. So Taina goes back to eating calmly. They both realize the assassin is probably saying he could take care of them in the future, in case he's betrayed. Suddenly, those thugs walk into the restaurant complaining about the heat. One of them tells the woman to turn the AC on full blast, asking how she plans to pay her interest if the customers don't stay. Yang-suk says she paid everything and asks why they're causing a scene again. She tells Taeha to come back after lunch in a smoke, also sending Gray off to school. Baksu tells her to leave them alone, assuring that he won't do anything to the two. However, he seems confused and irritated about something. He says he's never seen that boy around there, questioning how someone could end up eating a place like that. On the other hand, the protagonist is surprised at the size of the radish kimchi. Furious, the guy asks if the brat is choking on the food or something. Standing up, Gray tells the lady he's heading to school. He heads toward the exit while glancing back. He remembers he asked his friend to promise something before listening to his requests. He tells Taha not to kill or do anything like that, begging him not to turn the neighbors against each other. The protagonist asks if the boy thinks he would go after people recklessly, but Gray says that's exactly what he did. Returning to the subject, the guy asks what his request is. His friend reminds him that the 3rd district of Jiangxiu is at a stalemate between Qiangu and Ojang. When those disputes were really about to turn into chaos thanks to a local gang, Yaburi the fight was halted. However, Teha asks if a small gang really managed to stop a power struggle between Qiangu and Ojang. Gray reiterates that the safety of everyone was ensured by Yaburi. However, they are also buying buildings to create a housing cooperative, so they can negotiate in future cases. The protagonist notes that it seems he disagrees with that. He says that if an agreement with a solution would have been done already, stating that the mayor was elected with Ojang's support. Moreover, Yang-suk tried talking to the boss, but apparently she's not worth his time, asking Taeha to speak on her behalf. However, he couldn't kill or irreversibly harm anyone. The protagonist admits that, in his view, they're nothing more than common thugs, but they were able to make the crime leaders back off. He simply stands up thanking the lady. Baksu, annoyed, asks if he's really going to ignore him. He tries to go after the brat, but Yang-suk steps in front of him. The woman says she already asked him not to touch her customers, saying she already paid and asking what the ugly guy is doing there. The guy raises his hand to slap her, asking who she's calling ugly. But Taeha stops the slap using a bowl. So even before Gray walks away from the shop, the three of them go flying through the door. The protagonist follows right behind them. The boy couldn't believe the lunatic did all that in under 10 seconds. Terrified on the ground, Baksu asks if the brat even knows who he is. As he approaches the men, the guy admits mentally that his revenge consists of 30 grand schemes. Even with all the planning, some parts were still uncertain. After all, he hadn't considered that his real enemy would be Chang. Because of that, he considers this a failure, but says he might be able to guess his plan for the future. Since even being of Jin family bloodline, he'll still need to be elected president by the board. So he will use the development of the Jiangsu district to stir up the board, asking the delinquents to take him to their boss. While they ask if the boy is crazy, a girl from across the street asks who he is. Suri asks if he wants to start a war against her gang all by himself. However, Taika just responds negatively. He calmly grabs his cigarette and lights it, saying he's only there to talk. Shuri asks what he means by that, saying that there's no way she can believe it with her men lying on the ground while he says something like that. However, the protagonist simply looks toward them, understanding the situation. The boy apologizes, saying they don't seem interested in listening to him, so he doesn't want to talk to people like that either. Looking up, Taya realizes that's how they managed to make both sides back down. With armed men spread across all the buildings, he states that if these guys took control of the whole city, the 3rd district of Jiangxia would become the base of these armed forces. Moreover, if even one of them used to be an officer, it's certain they have a very efficient system. He wonders if this is how Korea prepares itself. The girl says she can listen to his last words, asking him to be brief, calling him a bastard from Ojong or Chiangu. Obviously, that makes the guy mad. But before he can take a single step, a shot hits the asphalt in front of him. Suri tells him to say where he's from unless he wants to be full of holes. The girl says he better hurry up. However, that just makes the assassin even more irritated. Clenching his fist, he says he knew this day would come, stating he can't believe the day would unfold in such a disgusting way. Her guards warn her that it's dangerous, asking if they should kill him. She quickly calls for someone named Hwaryeon. Her subordinate jumps off the building, landing quickly in front of the protagonist. The guy was huge, literally known as Tank. The guy stands still, staring down the kid. But contrary to expectations, Taya simply tells the guard to step aside. The man stands there staring, unmoved. Unexpectedly though, he does as the protagonist ordered, leaving Suri completely confused by the guard's behavior. The girl asks how he could betray her like that while her other subordinates rush over. Surprisingly, the assassin just grabs the milkshake she was drinking. Throwing it away, he says it's no wonder nothing she does goes as planned. This obviously leaves her bewildered, not knowing what just happened. He gets close to her face while looking toward the building, saying something into her ear. She's left confused and scared by how things are turning out. Walking away, the protagonist says that either way, they don't seem worth his time. The girl was still paralyzed while her men ask if they shouldn't go after him. However, she calmly approaches Hwaryeon. The man admits he couldn't feel any kind of threat coming from the protagonist. The girl asks if that's why he let that lunatic get so close to her, stating her gang is really united. Smiling, the guy asks if she felt it too, claiming that even he was able to sense it, saying it's been a long time since the war, long enough to forget what it's like to see something real. Later, still at the ladies' restaurant, they were working to fit the door back into place. Gray asks his companion to hold it steady while he screws it in. They fix the restaurant's entrance. Both announce it's all done, saying the door now closes properly. While Yeon-suk asks if he's sure he fixed it right, Gray assures her he did and begs her to give them some food. Of course, she scolds Talha, saying if he breaks anything again, she'll kick him out of there. She was still scolding him since the door was expensive, but then Suri appears and breaks it again. The girl asks what's wrong with that door. Hugging Yeon-suk, the brat says she missed her and asks how she's doing. Pulling the girl's cheeks, the woman asks when these delinquents will let her door see the morning light. Seeing that, the protagonist thinks to himself the girl is completely different from how she was earlier that day. Once again, someone sets the door in place. Aside from fixing the door, Shuri says she heard Baksu laid a hand on the lady last time. Apologizing, she says she broke all his fingers to make sure he never does something like that again. However, the woman tells her to finish fixing the door and go eat, saying the girl is skin and bones. Great explains to the protagonist that during a war that happened there, Yeon-suk helped treat many members of Yaburi, also treating Suri's father for free several times, which is why they consider her their savior. Taeha asks out loud how gang lackeys can treat someone who's considered their boss's savior so rudely. Obviously, the girl doesn't like hearing that. Looking at her, the protagonist says everyone calls her the boss, but the girl is just a symbolic figure. She jumps at him, wrapping several wires around him, focusing especially on his neck. Suri curses at him, saying she's been going easy from the start, but the brat doesn't seem grateful. Confident, the girl asks him to repeat what he said. The protagonist realizes those wires aren't normal, noticing their tension is different. To her surprise, the guy claims she must know that better than he does, saying that among those men who were positioned inside the buildings when he was there, some seemed to have their weapons aimed at a specific spot. Instead of targeting the intruder, they were aiming at their own boss, saying that while everything externally looks like a stalemate, she acts like nothing more than a puppet controlled from within. At the moment he approached her, the boy asked Suri to meet him at the ladies' restaurant, since there were too many spies there, asking who ordered them to buy the buildings there, wondering if it was Ojang. While the girl pulls the wire tighter, the protagonist claims there's only one last option, asking if it was Chiangu, but the girl pulls pulls the wire, visibly furious. But to her surprise, all the wires had snapped. With his dagger in hand, Taya says he got his answer. Elsewhere in the city, in a luxurious house, a man was banging on a glass window, begging the director to save him, saying that even with the failed deal with Lebanon, he guarantees he'll raise twice the revenue in 2 months. On the other hand, the director was on the phone asking what happened. The spy says an intruder approached Suri earlier, claiming the boy might have noticed them and asking how he should proceed. A cage begins to open with some feline inside. A hungry lion steps out into the same yard where the man was. Desperate, the guy tells the animal to stay back, begging the director frantically, pleading for another chance. But as expected, the man does nothing, letting the guy be killed and devoured by the beast. In the photo he received, the protagonist's face was fully exposed, making the director find it interesting. Ingyu orders them to bring the brat to him, alive. Taya says that apparently the one behind the entire 3rd district was really Chiengu. Furthermore, the reason the girl hasn't dealt with them is because she's being threatened. Suri starts complaining about who that guy is. After all, he cut through her wires like they were nothing, even though they're her best weapons made of Kevlar fiber. She indirectly questions who he is. The protagonist assures her he's simply the best person in the whole country at killing Chiengu. That obviously leaves her even more confused. He claims that if Chiengu is her problem, he supposes he can help her. Gray assures her that she can trust the protagonist. She's surprised when the old lady arrives. Young-suk also tells Suri she can trust that guy. That shocks her even more, since the woman usually doesn't meddle in anything. With that, she gets off the table. As she walks away, the girl says that if it were just a matter of killing a few people, everything would have already been solved. Irritated, she warns that this is her last warning and tells Teha to leave the district. She leaves, abandoning the 3 at the restaurant. Later, the protagonist and the old lady are smoking outside. He thanks her for trying to help earlier, when she asked the girl to trust him if the matter involved dealing with Chiengu members. But Yang-suk just says it's the truth, complaining if there's anyone else capable of standing against them in this country. The protagonist asks who secretly plotted all that mess within Chiengu. The woman says it was the director of the electric company, Inyu, assuring him that that worm is always behind everything. She says that when the former leader of the Yabiri, Suri's father, nearly died in the redevelopment war, that man took him to the hospital. But only the 2 of them know that. The rest of the neighborhood thinks he died, because if they knew, there would be resistance, and they'd all end up dead. Yang-suk admits she would prefer everything be resolved without Suri's father dying and asks if Teha could help. They go silent for a moment. Someone reports being B1 and warns that the target is in their sights. They ask if there was in conversation. The spy says yes, affirming that Yang-suk asked the intruder for help, claiming that the man is harder to read so he doesn't know what the answer was. This was a mercenary from the private company Peak. The person on the other end raises the possibility that the guy is a mercenary. B1 says that either way, they just need to bring him in alive. His colleague asks about the woman and the boy from the restaurant, but the mercenary says they're unnecessary, claiming he'll just kill them all. But Taya was already right behind him. The guy gets extremely startled when he notices his presence. The protagonist quickly hits his hand, preventing him from using his weapon, closing the distance between them fast. His colleague asks what happened, if B1 is okay, tells him to answer already, but the mercenary is still trying to pull out the knife that was stabbed into his hand. Meanwhile, the boy calmly walks over to the spot where his enemy had been watching him earlier. He picks up the radio lying on the ground, saying he's B1 and not to worry, saying goodbye and that he'll see them soon. Sometime later the next day, at the Chienbu's private hospital, a guy eats something while stating that he asked for all contracts to be completed yesterday, asking if Shuri took his words seriously. The girl says she's trying to convince everyone to sign the papers, saying that way they'll avoid problems later. Her father was breathing through machines, clearly struggling. Ingyu says he truly doesn't see useless people as human beings. While stabbing something into the man's leg, the lunatic claims they're just chunks of meat from his perspective. Obviously, the girl is shocked and screams at him. Still jabbing her father with the fork, the director says the machines are beeping like crazy, claiming that proves he's alive, saying he's doing his best to keep that chunk of meat alive. Suri, extremely shaken, assures him she understands, saying she'll bring all the signed documents no matter the cost. She trembles as she begs Ingyu to stop, saying she'll do exactly as he asked. He grabs the girl by the face as she begs him to leave her father alone. The freak calls her a lady of the night, assuring her that if she follows all his orders, everything will be fine. Obviously, she's furious, but she can't do anything. The creep says he loves seeing that defiant look, claiming it's worth taming her. Showing her a paper, the man asks if she met that man yesterday. Looking down, she still seems a bit dazed. The girl looks at a photo of the protagonist while Inyu claims he wants to meet him, asking her to bring him before the day ends. She stops crying, still looking at the photo. As he leaves, the guy tells her not to forget, saying she has a lot to lose if she betrays them. A doctor bows in front of the director. The guy walks nonchalantly toward the elevator. While he calls someone who doesn't pick up, another person was also in the elevator. Ingyu is irritated, asking what those delinquents are doing that they're not answering, saying he ordered them to find Taiha. He keeps complaining while looking at the other person inside. As expected, it's the protagonist who just stares at the director. The guy tries to say something, but the boy simply cuts off his ear. Not really understanding what happened, Ingyu looks down and sees the piece that was taken. Obviously, he starts screaming in despair. Taiga says he heard about it through rumors, saying that apparently the director was after him. The guy asks if the protagonist even knows who he is, trying to end with a punch. Ingyu asks how the boy dares to lay a hand on him, recalling that during his conversation with Yongsuk, she told him that in the redevelopment war, Chiungu hired mercenaries. They were men from the Peak Company, ruthless killers who do anything for money. The protagonist asks if the director really thought everything would be resolved if he just threw more money at it. Grabbing the mercenaries' dog tags, Taha declares that if the guy wants bloodshed, he better be prepared to watch his own spill. He throws all the tags into the lunatic's mouth. The psychopath assures Ingyu that no matter where or when, he will find him and stab him once a day from now on. With that, he says to get ready and take aim, saying the hunt starts now. After some time, the man was running desperately, wondering what was happening. He fell to the ground as the protagonist calmly approached him. The director screamed, begging him to stop. Crying, he pleaded for him not to come any closer. Taiha had killed all the guards, which explained his calm demeanor. The boy stabbed his leg. He told the man to stop being dramatic, assuring him that the femoral region has a lot of muscle, so he wouldn't suffer a serious injury. As he pulled the blade out, the protagonist stated that compared to other places he had struck, this one wasn't so bad. Cleating his knife, he said he would see him tomorrow. After some time, a sort of festival painting appears. Xiaolong drinks wine as he informs that out of the 15 directors, 7 are his allies. 6 support the vice president, and the remaining 2 are neutral. He states that in difficult times, they should stick together, lamenting that it's a shame. Another person agrees, saying they can hardly imagine how distressed the late president would be with this. They say the 2 neutral members can only be persuaded by action, assuring that the young ones are surpassing the vice president. However, unexpectedly, Cham calls for Ingyu. He says he heard he's working on the Jiangxiu redevelopment case, asking if he can expect good results by the meeting. Nervous, the director simply agrees, assuring him completely. But the man starts laughing, asking him not to be so formal and why he looks so nervous. In a terrifying tone, the man tells his colleague to do his best so they can avoid any future hostility. While placing his hand over his latest wound, Ingyu assures that he doesn't want things to turn out that way. Later, he walks toward his car. He sits in the back seat, clearly in a lot of pain. He recalls the protagonist's words as he stabbed him with his dagger. The man curses him, claiming he'll destroy him next time. His driver asks if he should take him home. The director kicks his seat, questioning if that kind of question is even necessary. As Ingyu locks everything that can be locked, Taha appears in the passenger seat, asking if the man committed any crime. Obviously, the man is in disbelief that he got in there. Pulling out his blade, the protagonist says that apparently that leg doesn't have much education, quickly stabbing it into the man's knee. That makes the director scream desperately. After that, the psychopath calmly steps out and says he'll be back tomorrow. Terrified, Ingyu asks who he is and why he keeps doing that, stating that he won't get what he wants if the man doesn't talk. Night falls. Taya says it's already the 7th day, and even though he's been stabbing him in non-lethal areas, the director must surely be reaching his limit. He tells Suri that even if they hand him over, her group will never be the same again. They ask what the protagonist was thinking going after the director, claiming it was very hard to drive them out. One of them asks their boss for permission to kill him, stating that if they don't hand him over, another war will break out. Suri questions why he did that and why he came there to tell them. But Taiga simply says there's error 307. He states that this error prevents people from fully using online banking, an error usually encountered by journalists. Additionally, the internet speed there is below 10K, as if everyone's grinding their teeth waiting to be hacked. He asks her why that is. However, the 2 guards claim he doesn't understand anything, saying he's just an outsider. Even knowing that everything is because of Chiungu, she still stands firm for their families. He says that if all she wants is to protect her family, they should have stayed out of the way, questioning why they didn't fight back. However, Shuri just lowers her head, unsure of what to say. Leaving, Taiga says the director will try to deal with it on his own since he can't trouble the council, and tells them to be ready. Hworyong asks what the boy gains from all of this. He claims he'll earn the title of director within Chiungu. Later, in the same house where Ingyu once released a lion to devour his subordinate, a man says it's a tragedy for both of them. The CEO of the mercenary company Peak says he never imagined the powerful director would be suffering such humiliation from an outsider. But Ingyu tells the man to shut up, claiming he's not tolerating it because he likes it. While smoking, he curses the protagonist, saying that if it weren't for the council meeting, this would have already been resolved. In sick-ass Squatty doesn't just bring that up, but the man vehemently denies that possibility. He assures that they symbolically call that meeting as such, claiming it can completely reorganize Chiungu. He says he's always maintained a friendship with Chum, and that once he's finally appointed, he'll have a kind of god by his side. He tells him it's best he gives it his all too, since if the project fails, the guy will also be punished for associating with him. With that, In6 says that Psycho managed to handle his men so he did a background check on his own. He asks if Ingyu has heard of the Solernos from Italy. The man admits he has no idea, asking if it's some kind of mafia. The CEO confirms, claiming they're insane. He says the boy is one of them, going by the name Vendetta. their best executioner. The only thing known is that he's Asian. He states that since he's a senior director at Shinbu, he must have a lot of money. In-Sik then asks how much he'll need. He says that if a nuclear bomb appeared, they'll need to create one of their own, declaring that someone who can rival him has been summoned to Korea. He says that Jerome is a guy who crossed paths with this vendetta twice and lived to tell the tale. However, the director says he should have found someone the protagonist understands, not someone who just survived. Still, the guy explains that the boy is infamous for chasing a traitor even to the ends of the earth. He tells a story of how once Vendetta went into the Amazon jungle to hunt down a traitor, surviving solely on insects. Ingyu asks if that doesn't just make Jerome good at running, but In-Sik replies that if that were the case, he wouldn't have come immediately. The CEO states that the commission is $700,000 upfront, $300,000 later, and another $300,000 as brokerage. He claims it was very hard for him and his men to bring that guy in. The man asks how many men In-Sik still has. He assures that if he wants his company involved, the payment will have to be doubled. The director makes a call, ordering them to bring 200 kilograms of cash to the first floor of the basement. With that, the elevator doors open. Something inside glistens in the light. He asks the CEO if it really makes sense to spend $1.3 million to kill one man. Ingyu says that there's 200 kilograms of 50,000 won notes there, each weighing about 0.97 grams, affirming the guy can do the math. He assures it's more than enough to retire on, saying they need to have a productive conversation. Someone was observing a blueprint from somewhere. Gray says that it's the blueprint of the director's property, and that he got in touch with a security company and bought the poster. Taeha asks how he managed to buy it. The boy says that except for Chienbu's own insurer, all the others trade for money. After all, Chienbu is always ready to replace anyone who doesn't turn a profit. In other words, their employees have no loyalty. Hearing that, the protagonist says his grandfather would rise from the grave if he heard such a thing. The boy explains that most of Inyu's schedule is sent from headquarters, so it's risky. The best time is 10 p.m. However, they realize they don't have the blueprint of the first basement floor. Gray says he's sure one exists since there are stairs and elevators, but supposes that the blueprint might be with the director himself. He notices that the phrase B1 Kruk appears several times, and based on his studies, that's some kind of cement used in construction. Since it's highly resistant to moisture, chemicals, and weather, it's used for soundproof walls and even in zoos. Hearing this, the protagonist falls into thought for a moment. Taeha asks the boy to do him a favor. Gray says he's listening. Vendetta gets close to the boy and whispers something in his ear. He asks why all of a sudden, but the protagonist simply says he supposes he'll need it. Gray says he has that at home, but never thought the guy was the type to use those things. However, Taeha claims there's no such thing as a type for that kind of thing, and asks the kid to keep an eye on the CCTV for any intruders. After that, he calmly leaves the restaurant. Someone asks if he's heading out again. Horion asks if the lunatic is going to provoke the director again. The protagonist says it's hard to think someone being stabbed every 24 hours would see that as just a provocation. He says he's been around since the revolution of the 90s, so he knows how to spot real talent. Even so, he'd never heard of him before and asks who the kid is. Taeha asks if it would change anything if the man knew who he was. The big guy seems a bit irritated by this. He warns that if he refused to explain, he'll be considered a threat to the boss and will have to be eliminated right there. The protagonist just stares indifferently, saying that the man knows his opponent's skills and still wants to fight fair instead of scheming to get an advantage, claiming that apparently he used to be part of the Ojom gang. As he leaves, Vendetta says he trusts his skills too, which is why he's leaving the place under his care while he's gone, assuring him that he'll personally compensate him if there's any redevelopment, offering 10 times the amount initially offered. Night finally falls. The director's mansion is as quiet as ever. The protagonist had managed to slip past the entrance security. With some caution, the assassin slowly opens the door, using his knife to hold it open. He then begins walking through the rooms looking for his target. Seeing how quiet everything is and the lights all off, Taeha assumes the dear director hasn't returned yet, but that he notices the stairs that Gray suspected led to the first basement floor, wondering if that's the entrance. And so the lunatic simply starts descending the staircase, stopping in front of a glass window that shows a lion's habitat. Suddenly, the door slams shut. Ingyu speaks through a speaker box, saying it's good to see him again. Obviously, Vendetta realizes this is a trap. The director says he suspected from the start that he'd gotten hold of his schedule. After all, the kid always knew when to strike, calling the assassin a disgusting insect. With that, the lion's cage opens. The man says it doesn't matter how skilled the protagonist is with knives, he'll never be able to face two lions. Naturally, the felines begin to roar, showing off their predator nature. Ingyu says he couldn't do anything in the 3rd district because of the Ojong gang, but now he has the perfect excuse, declaring that as he's devoured alive, the place will fall as armed assassins infiltrate, assuring that tonight the boy and all the scum of the 3rd neighborhood will be wiped out. Calling the lions by name, the director orders them to attack. With that, the lions begin to approach him, quickly running toward their prey. Naturally, even the protagonist feels fear in a moment like that. However, he pulls out the flamethrower and still criticizes their names, saying both are males, taking them down with bullets. Seeing this, Ingyu no longer knows what to do since his entire plan has failed. The director asks if that was a gun, wondering why the psychopath isn't using his knives. However, Taya says the daggers are for humans and asks if the guy thinks he's in a comic book to imagine someone would do that. Speaking on the phone, he contacts Gray, realizing he still has a signal. Cutting the splint off his arm, he warns that an attack is coming soon, asking the boy to tell Suri to get ready. With that, Ingyu starts trembling in fear and nerves, remembering the story of how he entered the Amazon just to hunt down a traitor, surviving for a month eating only insects. He locks up tighter as he sees the calm with which the protagonist speaks on the phone. Vendetta, terrifyingly, looks into the camera and says that while Gray does his part, he'll hunt down the director. The boy informs everyone that Chienbu is on his way there, especially warning about the Peak Company, confirming that the message ends with Taya asking them to wait for his return and he's going to get Ingyu. Furthermore, since that fight is inevitable, the best choice is to face them head-on. If they don't do that, it will be the end of everyone. The Emperor gang members are furious, claiming that the scammer must have run away after causing all that chaos. Gray tries to defend his friend, assuring them that he will return, but the guys tell him to shut up. They say the kid doesn't even know how the last war went, mentioning that children his age died, leaving their parents grieving to this day. Stopping the boy, Yang-suk also assures everyone that Taeho will return. Some question what that man means to her, but another person declares that it's enough. Assistant Suyan tells everyone to be quiet, stating that this is not a decision for them to make. He asks his boss what they should do. The girl obviously was also irritated and worried. Suri says she didn't see the last war, as when she came back it was already over. Confusing them, the girl says she was afraid of losing her father, and because of that, she became Chienbu's puppet. Apologizing for deceiving them, she claims that now is the time to end everything. That's why all the members of the Yubiri gang should join forces and drive Chienbu out once and for all. InSick informs that the director's plan is to kill everyone living in the 3rd district. Since no property owner has the right to significant apartments, the construction company can make greater profits by selling luxury apartments. Even though the truce with Ojong prevents them from attacking, with the appearance of the intruder Vendetta and the assassin pursuing him, the story changes. His men say that apparently, the assassin is a decoy. The bald man confirms, claiming that this despicable Chienbu is good at what he does, warning that it's strictly necessary for them to stay out of the fight until the Ojong gang arrives, since Vendetta and that guy will be responsible. Jerome had been watching everything nonchalantly, admitting that he initially expected nothing, but now this is really starting to captivate him again. He says he can smell the war, mentioning that Korea seems to be a very interesting country. The CEO of the company orders them to turn on the drones. With that, a van is shown in an alley, another in a parking lot surrounded by combat drones. All of them had bombs attached to their bodies. And Six says that unlike the last war, they won't need to limit themselves to small arms anymore. He laughs, claiming they are mercenaries. As long as there's money, there are no rules, ensuring they'll win every battle. While a car speeds down a highway, and you ask the CEO if his men are on guard, desperately asking him to confirm this properly. The guy tells him to relax, assuring him that the director should be more protected than the president, since 70% of his men are on guard. He starts kicking the back of his driver's seat, telling the bald guy to say that after being stabbed in a public sauna, instructing them to only monitor the surroundings, claiming that the psychopath threatened to hunt him down. The protagonist was inside a car, and Ingyu notices, saying that Vendetta is approaching. Taya thinks to himself that installing trackers in all of the director's cars was definitely worth it. Additionally, he's concerned about how Gray and the others will handle things in the district, claiming he needs to finish this soon. In one of the security cars, a guard warns the driver that the assassin is right behind them. The guy questions how that crazy person knew they were there. While preparing to shoot, the soldier asks how fearless this Vendetta guy really is. With that, he sprays the windshield with bullets, aiming at the driver. Somehow, the protagonist manages to survive without getting hit. However, his car seems to lose control. The security guard warns the others that the black sit-in behind them is the target. A bus aligns with Taeha's vehicle. He's surprised to see that while they order everyone to stay alert. Several soldiers prepare their rifles through the window, stating they won't give him a chance to catch his breath. However, the protagonist quickly slams the brakes and throws himself into the barrier. He breaks one of the doors while simultaneously jumping out of the car, using it as a sort of skateboard on the asphalt. Obviously, his car flips ahead. He looks back, startled, trying to figure out his next move. After all, besides the many cars, 2 motorcycles with armed soldiers are approaching. Thus, he uses the door to knock one of them down, jumping and landing a knee to break the other guard's helmet, quickly taking out both of them. He steals one of the motorcycles for himself, accelerating as fast as he can to catch up with the director. For some reason, one of the escort vehicles was a truck with a car ramp. One of the guards says they have a visual on him, ordering his companions to open fire. The Neo from the Matrix dodges all the bullets, entering their blind spot and heading toward the ramp, realizing it's time to play some GTA, accelerating even more to gain momentum. and jumping over the truck. Still in the air, he prepares for another bold move, skillfully leaping from the motorcycle toward another vehicle, landing on top of one of the security cars. Carefully, he stands up and gets on his feet, breathing deeply and getting ready, taking his 2 daggers in hand and saying that from now on, the fun begins. Since they couldn't risk hitting their own comrades, the guards just watched the protagonist, noticing he didn't even have a weapon. The lunatics decide to speed up, saying that as soon as he gets alongside the vehicle, they'll crush him. Naturally, Taeha can hear the engine revving louder. He lifts his head while listening carefully, waiting for the right moment. So Vendetta simply makes a small jump to stop relying on the car for support. Consequently, he heads straight toward the bus. The protagonist quickly gets ready to enter through the windshield, taking advantage of the guard's moment of confusion. With that, he smashes the glass and enters the vehicle. The soldiers obviously weren't expecting anything like that, so they barely react. Taking advantage of the situation, Vendetta swiftly slashes them down fatally, passing through them like a brutal hurricane, literally disconnecting all of his enemies' heads. Then he breaks the windows separating the driver and sits next to him. Obviously, the guy doesn't know what to do in that situation. He could barely process how a biker who was just flying a moment ago could now be there. Handing over some money, Taeha apologizes and asks if the man could drive a bit faster, assuring him it won't take long. In the district, it's reported that drones have been confirmed within a 600-meter radius, claiming that 16 were sighted. Gray reports that they split up to strike from a lower altitude. Also, judging by the speed, they seem to be FPVs. Suyeon says it's exactly what they expected. A few hours earlier, Shuri had asked the Major how the last war was fought. The man explains that Cheong and Ojong only fought during prearranged times. She says it's ironic as they're not in medieval Europe. Still, she asks why the war was contained within the district. After all, whenever one side left, the other did the same. The Major explains that only small arms were used and only Peak made use of them, since both gangs didn't want to draw attention. After all, if a monster like that appeared again, no one would live to see the next day. With that, the girl becomes thoughtful for a moment. Stuyan says that's why Peak tried to end things before it reached Ojang's radar, but taking over the district would take too long. The boy finally understands the reason behind the drones. The assistant says they are probably equipped with RPGs or grenades for self-destruction, warning that they must prepare. The drones begin to fly over the region. Some soldiers spot them and get ready to fire with anti-drone weapons to take them down. With that, some of them start to hover in place. One soldier celebrates the hit. Another shoots with his rifle while cursing the mercenaries. The bald man is informed that they lost control of drones on 1st and 7th Streets, assuming the enemy might have anti-drone capabilities. And Sick questions why they're making that assumption. His subordinate says the signals were lost only in certain locations. Naturally, the CEO gets furious, asking if Yapuri has radars. Besides, anti-drones aren't something commonly seen. Laughing, he assures that won't be enough to stop them. Suddenly, Gray is incredibly surprised. They try to understand what's happening with the drones, reporting that there are many of them, assuming at least 100. And Sick asks if they really thought his company would start a war with just 10 to 20 drones. The anti-drones only block a small area, and when you point in another direction, the signal comes back. Now with hundreds of drones scattered across the sky, the guy wonders how many they'll be able to suppress. With the previous war leading to renovations in most of the district's buildings, a simple command allows drones to be sent anywhere. The CEO says he's eager to know how many will survive with 800 explosive drones behind them. Someone on the radio reports that drones are infiltrating through the ventilation, warning that they seem to know the layout of the building. Suvian orders everyone to get out of there, saying those have already been programmed, so there's no way to stop them. Smiling, the Major assures that the boss is already heading over. Someone calls out to the bald man, saying there's something strange in the sky. And Sick looks up, confused. The sky seemed as normal as ever, but suddenly, several lights appear. They intensify more and more. Then several explosions start going off. On top of one of the buildings in front of the drones was Shuri, trying to draw the attention of as many as she could, quickly manipulating her threads, completely wrapping them, making them stop. Then she jumps away while making them self-destruct. Insik is startled, asking who that is, assuring that nothing like that ever happened during the last war. Some time ago, her subordinates were asking what that was. She apologizes for not telling them before, claiming that this is her true weapon. The girl says maybe they're surprised, but as she said, she was somewhere else during the last war, saying she was in another place learning how to use that weapon to help her father, but fate made her arrive too late. That's why she wants to make things right this time, saying they will ensure those bastards never step foot in their neighborhood again. Suvian is proud, asking Gisav to see how much his daughter has grown. The bald man orders another batch to be brought in, telling them to overwhelm them with numbers, ordering to blow up everyone in their path. But when his soldier tries to respond, something seems to surprise him. Suddenly, someone hits the van behind him. Someone informs Orion that this must be some kind of drone command center. The big guy confirms they were right. With that, the CDO becomes nervous upon seeing him. The tank heads toward the bald man, stating that it'll take care of that guy first. 10 years ago, the guy asked if his friend really wanted to form a gang. He said times were changing, and instead of paying some gang for protection, it was easier to start their own. The major said he was still a soldier, and besides, there was no one there who could fight like Gizab. But the guy assured him they weren't getting together to beat anyone up, just to make negotiations easier. With a smile, he asked his friend what he thought of the name Yaburi. Back to the present, the mercenaries were wondering how Hworyong had found that place. The soldiers reported that Alpha Team had identified a threat. The big guy kept running faster, lowering his head to avoid the gunfire. Annoyed, their captain shouted to stop aiming at the head and shoot at his feet instead. But the tank had already slammed one of them against the wall. His partner couldn't believe what was happening. Then the big guy quickly took down the second mercenary, also slamming him unconscious against the wall. A sniper said Alpha Team's threat was in his sights. He admitted the man was a monster. However, before he could do anything, his body was completely sliced apart. As expected, it was done by the girl. She was sprinting quickly across rooftops. In-6 saw it and cursed furiously. She informed everyone that she had just taken out another sniper. Subion congratulated her on the work and warned that there were probably more, telling her to stay alert. Besides, they didn't even know she existed, so the snipers were likely positioned in places with a clear view downward. And the location where the snipers were grouped was probably the same place the drones were stationed. Gray said he had found a possible location. He claimed it was a public parking lot on the other side of the community center in a black van. The girl said she understood and was already heading there. But something caught her attention. After all, Hworyong had just been hit by a bullet. But his nickname wasn't Tank for nothing. The guy hadn't suffered a scratch. As he approached, he said that in the last 20 years of bloodshed, he had only survived as a mercenary in that country one way. In-6 swore he would kill the girl after taking care of all of them first. Tearing off his coat, the man revealed his robotic arm, saying he would finish the bald guy right there. Elsewhere, a car crashed onto a viaduct. Luckily, it didn't flip over when it hit the road below. The director was on his knees in front of the protagonist, calling him crazy, asking what Vendetta wanted with him and why he was doing all this. However, the man replied he had already said he planned to stab him once a day, and he drove the knife into the man's shoulder. And you asked if Taiho was insane to be doing something like this over such a petty reason. The protagonist pulled out his phone, saying it would be too much trouble to track him down if he went abroad, so he was taking him to the district. But the director insisted it was already too late. He assured him that by now there was nothing left on those streets. He declared that he had ordered his men to exterminate everyone, including children and the elderly, commanding them not to discriminate. He said he had spent more than 100 billion won, asking if the kid had any idea what that meant, saying they were supposed to destroy everything within an hour, using bombs, missiles, or whatever they found necessary. The protagonist said he'd heard many people died in the last war just for getting caught between the two gangs, claiming that it seemed the guy still didn't understand why he was only coming after him. He stated that no one is deadlier than someone who has lost their family, because people like that have nothing left to lose, so they risk everything without fear. However, there is a group of people even stronger than them, those who have a family to protect. Then the director remembered that day in the hospital. Tega said he was sure the man had also seen the eyes of someone who would do anything to protect their family, with a pain that tears through their lungs, a fury that destroys their hearts, all trapped in shallow breaths that promise vengeance. People like that are strong, and one of the ones who made them that way was none other than the director himself. So the protagonist told him to shut up and follow him silently. But Inju asked if the kid really thought things like family and revenge were stronger than money. Back to Hworyong's fight, the mercenary admitted he'd never imagined the guy was an exogen, the 16th in command of the gang during the last war. Dodging bullets, the big guy said that was in the past. Swinging his axe, Insik told his opponent not to belittle himself, stating everyone knows what that ranking means. Anyone within the top 20 in Ojong is considered one of the strongest in the nation. Suddenly, Suri's threads appeared mid-battle. The girl quickly managed to wrap the bald man completely. While cursing the girl, the man wondered what kind of thread it was that he couldn't even cut. She said his name, claiming she heard he was the one who killed the most in his entire city. Cursing him, Suri vowed to take his head to ease the sorrow in the hearts of those who remained. With that, Hworyong leaped toward him to deliver the final blow. The CEO tried to plead for them to wait, but to his luck, Jerome appeared and rescued him from there. This obviously surprised the big guy. Not much differently, Shuri also didn't understand what had just happened. The man said that because he had chosen toys like drones to win, that was the reason the bald guy ended up in that situation. Grabbing a crowbar, the assassin asked if he was wrong. Looking directly at the two, the guy states that he's going to begin. Still confused, the girl wonders if the man is a new enemy. Noticing that even though Insik was completely entangled in his wires, that lunatic pulled him out as if it were nothing. The leader of the mercenaries asks what the lunatic was doing to show up so late. However, Jerome simply says that their base is 350 meters to the northwest on the 4th floor of a ruined building, ordering the bald guy to go there. Before he can finish his sentence, Hworyong shoves the assassin against the wall. However, The tank seems surprised by something. After all, the guy is laughing while saying he'll stay there to have a little fun. In-6 screams over the radio in desperation, ordering them to get all the drones in the air. His subordinate objects, arguing they don't even know where the enemy's control center is. Nevertheless, the leader says it doesn't matter since his best man is already there. He orders them to kill everyone while Jerome keeps the guy busy. Suri approaches the guy saying he can't do something like that. This distracts the big guy for a moment, creating an opening for the assassin to land a kick and throw him far away. Obviously, Hworyong struggles to stop himself. Annoyed, he admits he didn't expect the guy to be able to throw 120 kilograms so far, noticing from his form that's not even his full strength. The big guy acknowledges that this man is truly promising. The girl calls out to her friend, but he asks his boss not to worry, stating that he'll take care of things there. The girl says she'll handle the drones, asking him to take the man down and bring him to the base. She says it's an order telling the guy to finish things there in the next 5 minutes, because if the peaks arrive first, it's over. However, Hworyong becomes extremely frightened by something. After all, Jerome appears next to the girl, asking if she's already leaving. He asked her to stay a little longer, claiming it'll be more fun that way. However, the big guy appears ready to punch him, landing a strong blow on the assassin, sending him flying. The guy once again asks her to leave it to him, assuring her that he'll catch up soon. The girl simply nods. With that, she starts running as fast as she can. Hworyong mentally admits that if she had hesitated, he would have cursed at her until she left. He's surprised that she's not losing her composure even though it's her first war, stating it must be in her blood. But Jerome starts laughing, asking if this isn't a surprise, admitting that if he takes a few more punches like that, he might actually die. The big guy complains about how he survived a direct hit to the chest, asking where the guy came from. His opponent says he's from the Philippines, explaining that he learned Korean out of sheer interest, and asks how his pronunciation is. They stand face to face, staring at each other. Jerome admits that his life has been boring lately, saying he misses fights and things like that. He introduces himself and says the two of them will have a lot of fun. With that, the lunatic punches Hworyong in the face. As expected, he strikes back. Preparing another blow, he introduces himself too, unleashing a series of attacks all over the enemy's body. While taking advantage of an opening and landing an uppercut, the assassin declares that he loves this. Naturally, a hit like that leaves Hworyong dazed. Before he can regain his senses, the psychopath lands another one. Still taking hits, the big guy remembers someone who discovered his identity, recalling the protagonist, stating that he trusted his abilities and would leave everything to him while he was gone. Clenching his fist, he wonders why that man would trust his abilities, remembering that during the First District War, he was the leader of the main squad of the Ojang gang when it was still new, and that Gisa was the head of Yaburi, a close friend who worked with him for the gang before retiring. Back then, he asked his friend to trust him, assuring him he would make sure everyone moved into an apartment with a great view. However, Suri's father argues that most people there are elderly, so they can't wait 10 years just to live there again. He says he'll fight, and if he dies along the way, at least he'll know he tried to do something. But before anything else, he asked a favor, saying that if he dies, he'll leave whatever comes next in his hands. Even badly injured, Hworyong gets up once more, yelling as he tries to land a hit on the opponent. But Jerome manages to dodge and counterattack, while the big guy admits he joined the Ojang gang to find out what it meant to be strong. However, the truth he found only brought him despair, a world full of talents that rose above him like mountains impossible to overcome. Upon reaching the top 16, the man finally realized that was the limit of his abilities. However, the death of his friend illuminated something he hadn't known, admitting that what made him stronger wasn't the mountains, but the people he needed to protect. Jerome kept landing blows on him, but surprisingly, Hworyong grabs the assassin's head, running while carrying him along with his body, stating that he's known as the tank for a reason, proclaiming that he's the one who paves the way so others can follow. His enemy seems surprised by the whole turnaround. Smiling, the weirdo says that Fist is full of conviction, claiming he thought they were just having fun from the start. Appearing behind him, the lunatic says that if the man is taking it seriously, he'll have to do the same. Grabbing a crowbar, Jerome admits that it was fun, saying he'll make him pass on without pain. With that, Hworyong is completely paralyzed in shock. A large slash cuts through him horizontally, even slicing the wall in front of him, causing it to begin falling on top of him. Someone praises the man for all his work. Unexpectedly, Taiha appears and cuts the wall, preventing it from falling on him. The protagonist asks Hworyong to let him take over from there, thanking him once again for all his work. With that, he turns his gaze to Jerome. Staring at him, the assassin says that vendetta is very late. The boy says that from now on, he will be his opponent. But first, Taha asks if his comrade can move even with those injuries, visibly covered in deep cuts. Hworyong insists that it wasn't enough, claiming that he's fine, assuring them that they'd have to kill him to make him stop moving. So the protagonist tells him to walk 1 block, saying there will be a black car near a streetlight. Inside the trunk, Ingyu will be waiting for him. He declares that he will take care of things here, asking the man to drive the car to their hideout. Jerome asks if they really think he'll let the big guy go so easily. However, Taya throws a manhole cover at his feet. As expected, the guy simply blocks it. The protagonist starts walking toward his opponent. Smiling, the lunatic asks if he's serious, quickly using his crowbar to catch the manhole cover still in the air, skillfully throwing it back, growing more and more excited. Vendetta runs toward him as fast as he can, barely managing to dodge it. Both stop at a certain distance from each other. However, Jerome lunges forward, seeming more and more thirsty for adrenaline. The protagonist says that apparently the guy has really been walking around claiming to be his rival. The weirdo asks if it isn't true. With that, they begin exchanging blows at an absurd speed. However, Taya says the only thing that guy is a stalker. But the assassin keeps laughing, claiming it's all the same. Several explosions erupt in the sky. Suri is taking down every drone she can. Tired, the girl admits there are too many drones around. Besides that, she can't waste too much time on this. Suddenly, a voice on the radio says that HQ is exchanging fire with the peaks about 50 meters from the base. Gray says the situation is dangerous, but their position makes it hard for enemies to approach, telling them not to worry. He says that as soon as that man returns, the war will be over, so they just need to hold on until then. The girl, hearing those words, wonders if he might be talking about someone in particular. Then she hears the sound of a car. Inside the trunk was the director. Even incredibly injured, Warion had gone there to retrieve him. Obviously, the man was increasingly afraid of what fate had in store for him. The big guy grabs him by the face like a doll. He wonders if the way to end the war is to smash that worm's skull right then and there. However, if that man loses, Shuri won't be able to face Jerome alone, so he considers it might be better to ask the Ojon for help. With that, he starts squeezing Inyu's face tighter and tighter, saying to himself that this is the one responsible for everything, and after his death, Peak and Jerome will have to retreat. However, Taiha and his opponent pass by above him, still fighting. The assassin was blocking the protagonist's blades. Both start clashing their weapons again, face to face, staring each other down once more. They exchange another flurry of blows. Vendetta manages to land a kick to his enemy's stomach, sending him flying. The guy uses his crowbar as leverage to stop. Getting up, he admits he was surprised to learn that his rival was in Korea, but says he might be starting to understand why he came here, destroying the air conditioner where he'd driven the crowbar's tip. He surprises the protagonist by saying that for assassins like them, that place is a paradise. Trying to hit him with it, Jerome asks if Vendetta doesn't agree. Obviously, the boy has a hard time dodging the attack. As a last resort, Taya throws himself backward through an apartment. However, his opponent had already anticipated that, laughing maniacally as he tries to strike him again. Subion asks if Gray is sure everything will end when that man arrives. The boy says he's absolutely certain, making the major freak out, asking who he is and why they have so much faith in him. Gray asks if the advisor remembers that the news used to call the Chinbu family royalty, informing him that the so-called terrorist was Taha. However, he asks the man to forget the words he just heard, saying that in fact he is not a terrorist who killed the royal family, because even though he left, that man is still part of that royal family, declaring that calling him the heir to the throne makes much more sense. In his mind, Vendetta remembers the first time their paths crossed. They were both in England and had the same target. Suddenly, a massive explosion shakes the tunnel walls. The protagonist and Jerome were fighting. The guy had fallen onto the train tracks. He supports himself with his crowbar. Looking down, he seems surprised, realizing that his legs had been completely shattered. Because of that, he couldn't move and a train was approaching. The guy even looks up, hoping for some help from Taha. However, the boy does nothing, claiming he was sure he had killed him in that moment. But then, sometime later, a cargo plane flies across the skies. Two people begin to fall from it. The protagonist says that once he was dealing with a traitor trying to escape to Russia. That's when they crossed paths again, fighting in midair. They started exchanging blows while free-falling, until Vendetta manages to strike his vest, cutting the parachute trigger, placing his foot on his chest and pushing him downward. Yet he didn't die that time either. On the contrary, Jerome seems to grow stronger with each confrontation. The madman keeps laughing, claiming the protagonist's strike wasn't enough, saying it came down to a very subtle difference, noticing that his right-hand strikes are weaker than the left-hand ones. With that, Jerome quickly charges at Taha, saying that Vendetta failed to kill him despite multiple opportunities, including the last blow. The guy lands a fiercely powerful strike. The protagonist realizes that his right arm begins to tremble after the attack, as it was the one that had been broken during his revenge. Taking advantage of that brief distraction, the lunatic appears behind him, questioning whether someone of his caliber really hurt his arm. The boy manages to dodge the strike, while his opponent says that after his brief experience in that country, he can even understand him. Jerome says it would be madness to assume that place isn't filled with great fighters, after they created a lawless environment by killing the president. He claims that even so, the best among them all is still Vendetta, since the only one to push him to the brink of death and make him stronger every time is him. The guy starts cutting the water tank with the tip of his crowbar, tearing a large gash into its structure, throwing that chunk at his opponent. Taya doesn't have time to react. The assassin jumps, preparing for the finishing blow while exploiting his enemy's vulnerability, landing an incredibly powerful strike, raising a cloud of smoke. He lands calmly on the ground. But to his surprise, the protagonist wasn't there. Wondering how the boy managed to escape that, he begins to tremble with rage, claiming he clearly saw him being hit, realizing that he can vanish from sight easily. He blocks one of the daggers his opponent threw. Jerome declares that Vendetta has failed once again and missed another chance. However, the protagonist cuts him off, assuring that this time he'll make sure it's over. As the blade finally hits the ground, Taha was already standing in front of his opponent. The guy couldn't understand what had just happened, asking if his rival had always been this fast. The assassin Vendetta delivers a slash that cuts everything around him in half. Taha says he's just like him, stating that he too grew through death, finishing his rival right then and there. Meanwhile, Shuri was desperately running across rooftops. She says that according to the radio, this is the last batch of drones, stating she needs to take them out as quickly as possible and return to base. The girl is confused upon seeing two men carrying a body. One of them notices her presence. Frozen, she wonders if those are more enemies. However, the guy calls her by name, claiming to be from a special forces unit of the Ojong gang. While saying they're acting under Captain Huimin's orders, the man himself appears in front of the protagonist. He immediately warns that he received orders to kill him, asking Taha what he should do. The two stare at each other after that unusual question. The protagonist remembers him, also wondering how he knew his location, realizing that he's probably not one of Inyu's men. Besides, if he wanted to kill him, the guy would have ambushed him instead of revealing himself. The boy says he thought he was special, stating that apparently he's part of Ojong. Huimin asks if he wants a thank you or something like that, claiming he should know they can't afford chaos there. Tagha says the guy probably didn't get the full story, but he assures him he wasn't the one who made the first move. Just as the two were about to start arguing in detail, the lunatic begins to rise like a zombie behind him. That obviously leaves both of them completely speechless. Barely able to talk, Jerome admits that was pretty serious. Naturally, Vendetta picks up his other dagger that was on the ground. However, the corpse manages to dodge. The madman pulls a grenade from his pocket. He throws it, saying he'll see his friend another time. The other two get flashbanged by the TR. The protagonist scans the area with his eye, trying to locate him. He starts walking, wanting to go after the zombie. However, Huimin stops the boy, telling him to wait a minute, saying Taha should maintain order. Obviously, Vendetta is irritated by this. Brandishing his dagger, the protagonist claims the zombie was first in line. However, his opponent easily blocks the attack. He realizes that this guy predicted his move. Huimin admits he can't see him at that ridiculous speed. Still, it would be humiliating to be fooled by the same trick twice. The captain says that from the looks of it, the boy isn't in fighting condition, questioning why he doesn't try being kind just once. He admits the guy always seems strong to him, but says he's someone promising who hasn't reached his full potential yet. That would mean Huimin is someone capable of pushing things forward within the gang. Both take distance from each other. The protagonist says he had already noticed, but considering his skills, his opponent doesn't seem to have blood on his hands. He asks if he's right in assuming Huimin has never killed before. The man tries to land a blow, but Tega disappears. Leaving the guy surprised, the protagonist was already behind him, smiling as he watches him. However, to the boy's surprise, the captain also increases his speed, saying that he's already beaten many until they were left in puddles of blood. Seeing that, Vendetta is shocked by the ferocity. Even so, he dodges the blow, telling the guy to head to the third floor of the abandoned building 450 meters northwest of there, saying it's there in the resident's hideout, stating that even if Huimin can't kill him, he'll gain something rewarding. But when he turns around, the man realizes no one is there anymore, left alone in the middle of that alley. Snorting in anger, he says he's sick of that brat. The third district was completely silent. The Ojong gang's special force speaks on the radio, ordering everyone to pay attention, telling them to surrender. If they don't, a squad will destroy each of them. The announcement is repeated once more as Insik hides to avoid getting shot. He curses as he sees his soldiers dead on the stairs. The guy complains, wondering if the Ojong gang also planted spies there, just like they did. Greg remained hidden in another room, asking if the major was okay and begging him not to pass out. Even struggling to breathe, Suyan tells the boy to speak more quietly, saying they can't let their locations be discovered. Over the radio, it said that they found 2 individuals in the hideout. However, there were many soldiers in surrounding buildings, making the area dangerous. His subordinate asks why they don't retreat, assuring him they'll be tough with Ojong there. But Insik tells them to shut up. Obviously, the mercenary leader could only think about the money, saying that opportunities like this only come once in a lifetime. The major speaks to the bald man, saying it seems he really wants to go all the way. The guy claims that if they manage to kill Giziab, Jerome will handle the rest. But that's only if they wrap things up there. He goes on saying he'll kill the leader of Yabura with his own hands. But Hand silently approaches him. Freezing him in fear, the person covers his mouth. It was Quarion, questioning if he really just declared that their lives were worth 10 billion won. Turning quickly, the bald guy says the man must be nothing more than a walking corpse by now. But the big man steps back, saying he'll make him spit out every drop of blood, swearing it's for all the ones he killed, landing a punch right in the center of his chest, making the mercenary leader vomit a massive amount of blood. The force of the blow is so strong it sends him flying out of the building. The mercenaries in the building across the street are frightened by that, but before they can do anything, some wires appear. With that, they start getting strangled. As she leaps, Shuri easily decapitates them. Meanwhile, In-Sik had died from the fall. While running, the girl realizes everything is finally over. After that, 5 minutes pass. Huimin had finally arrived at the building the protagonist had told him about. Upon entering one of the rooms, the guy asks what that is. At an improvised table, Taya asks the man to join them. The boy makes an observation, saying that at that table sits the representative of the 3rd District, a representative from the Chiengu Ingyu, and finally a spokesperson from the Ozhong gang, stating that apparently all the key parties are present. The protagonist announces that they are now officially going to negotiate the redevelopment rights of the district, claiming that everyone should walk away happy. Still in the Yaburi base building, someone tells their boss that they don't know how to say it, stating that they weren't tricked. They say they don't feel like the right person to speak there and ask if the sir could help. As someone approaches, the guy asks the old man not to grumble so much. He takes a deep breath after hanging up the phone and grabs his cigarette. With that, Taha offers his lighter, saying it must be hard working until that hour. Huimin says it seems the kid has started carrying his own cigarettes. The protagonist asks if the guy still hasn't gotten over it, wondering if he wants one in return, but he just refuses. The captain admits he wasn't confident in his victory during the last fight, saying that'll be the case for many of his future battles. However, he states that if he gets the chance to fight 3 more times, he guarantees he'll win. The boy simply watches him in silence. Annoying the guy, Vendetta says it's a shame he only has 1 life. With that, one of them finishes smoking their cigarette. As the protagonist walks away, Huimin asks how he can still be alive and well after facing Junsu. He says he won't tell him anything right there, declaring that, like it or not, the guy will know everything the next time they meet. The captain smiles, saying the brat never gives straight answers, saying he wants to see if Taya will act that way with the man who's about to arrive. After some time back at the abandoned building, Huimin returns accompanied by 2 more men, including Jepo. As they enter, Hworyong promptly bows, greeting them, introducing himself as the former leader of Group B from the ancient branch, saying he's sorry for making the vice president come all the way there. The older man says it's been a while since he last saw him, noticing the man has some injuries. However, the guy says that fortunately he's not having trouble moving. Japel says that apparently he is the problematic one here, asking him to stop the formalities. After all, Hworyong isn't part of the gang anymore, telling him not to bow so easily to others, saying he didn't let him leave so peacefully just to be greeted like that. Even Huimin notices the strange tension. The big man admits it's already surprising to see the 7th, but he never imagined seeing the 2nd-in-command show up there. He was the one who turned the gang into an organization incorporated into the political system. When he was appointed vice president, it caused quite a stir, admitting that the guy always led them toward victory. Where violence is not an option, he supposes that's even more troublesome than Chiengu. Everyone goes silent as they hear his footsteps approaching. Japel introduces himself and says that before they begin, there are some matters he'd like to address. Ingyu was still tied up, muttering non-stop. The man demands that they untie the director, saying he refuses to negotiate anything until then. Unlike Shuri, who is furious, the protagonist simply says that man is a criminal who violated the agreement. Taha was about to say something else, but the old man orders him to shut up. He claims the boy is an outsider who shouldn't even be there, warning that one more word and he'll leave. So the boy has no choice but to remain silent. The man once again demands they release the director, while Huimin seems pleased with his superior's stance. Since he couldn't speak, the boy just nods to the girl. She does as she was asked. Japel says there's a car waiting for him outside, ordering the guy to go first. Ingyu begins to leave, assuring them he'll repay his debt, telling everyone to wait, promising he'll make sure their deaths are as painless as possible. Suri obviously was furious about all of it. The girl asks what the old man's problem is, saying he was going to be betrayed by the manager and still did that. However, Japel asks how the bitch expects him to believe everything they said. That leaves her even more confused and outraged, asking how could she possibly know whether it was truly a breach of contract or just some internal dispute between the two. She slams the table, stating that the director kept her father hostage, the man who was almost killed by their 3rd best subordinate. Looking at the protagonist, the man asks if it wasn't him who stabbed Ingyu at the hospital. That, of course, leaves her speechless. He states that even if the director was threatening her people, it still wouldn't justify a war. So after they provoked and threatened that man with an outsider, it's his duty to hold both parties responsible for breaking the contract. After that, Japel asks if they have any strong evidence to contradict him. Clearly, the protagonist was dying to kill him. On the other hand, Shuri says that in that case, they're no longer interested in negotiating with the Ojum gang. The man says that decision is no longer in the girl's hands since they accepted the terms of the agreement, but violated them. The representative announces that within 24 hours they will send a proposal, informing them that they'll have another 24 hours to respond. With that, the 3 of them leave normally. Suri kicks the table, extremely irritated. Trembling, the girl says she couldn't even say everything she wanted to, declaring that Japel never intended to negotiate from the start. Taina simply agrees with her. She also suspects that there's a spy among them, since the old man already knew everything before even arriving there. The girl looks at the protagonist, asking if at least everything is going according to plan. He says yes, praising her work. Meanwhile, the members of Ojang head toward the car. Surprisingly, the older man says that Human should go separately, claiming he doesn't offer careers to cowards who hide at the first sign of defeat. But obviously, the captain doesn't like that, saying he explained exactly what was going on, declaring that he's still young and asks what was expected of him. However, Japel doesn't care and continues on his way. Yet someone intercepts their car. As expected, it was the protagonist. The car slowly approaches him. Cracking the window open a bit, Japel asks what he wants. The boy says that since both gangs are now part of a larger power structure, it's important they don't cross certain lines. Therefore, if they lose the director who was just released, and since Xiangu recently lost its president, they'll become more vulnerable, weakening the agreement between them, especially if the person and motive behind the disappearance remain a mystery. Stating that for someone who claimed he didn't need to negotiate with a stranger, he now has excellent reasons to at least discuss this. At that moment, Japel remembers what was said in the meeting. Recalling Horion, the man realizes that he wasn't waiting for him, but was waiting for the director's release. The old man admits that he expected the boy to come after him, but now that he realizes the kid isn't as foolish as he thought, he doesn't know what to think anymore. The old man completely changes his demeanor, saying there's a seat available and asks if the boy would like to join him. However, the protagonist says they're not that familiar with each other, claiming they just need to settle things in a simple way. Japel assures him that he wouldn't set a trap this late in the game, saying he just knows a great cigar lounge. Taya says that only makes things worse, since he's extremely picky about his cigars. The man says he heard that he was away from Korea for a while and asks where the protagonist has been living. The boy says he was in Italy. The old man says that even though he's not too familiar with them, the place he's talking about also has cigars, trying to remember the name. Before the man can even finish his sentence, the guy gets in the car, saying he should have mentioned that from the start. Japel is a bit surprised by the assassin's reaction. He notes that Seoul's speed limit is 31 miles per hour, but Taeda tells him not to worry and just to hurry. After that, they arrive at the place. A white-haired man approaches them. He says these are the cigars the gentleman usually smokes. Additionally, he brought the ones he had ordered. The man says he'll enjoy them as always. The waiter wishes them a good time. However, before he leaves, Taya calls him, asking if they have matches. The waiter says yes and asks if he should bring them. It was a high-end place with incredibly expensive drinks. The boy says that isn't a typical cigar made with a Kentucky blend appreciated by workers as well as other social classes, characterized by its considerable length, which is sometimes cut in half to be shared with partners. Handing a piece to Japel, he explains that's why it was named the friendship cigar. A bit surprised, the man takes it, saying it takes about half an hour to an hour to smoke a whole cigar, realizing Taya only wants a 15-minute talk. With that, both remain silent for a moment. The old man admits that the cigar isn't bad. He also confesses that he doesn't care what happens to the 3rd district, as topics like that don't interest him. That's why he reveals the real reason he showed up there. First, Human still doesn't know how to handle situations like that. Second, he couldn't understand how someone capable of facing Qianhu's royalty ended up in a place like that. The protagonist says he almost died back then, assuring he's only alive because of the people from there. He requests the man to offer guaranteed housing to the citizens until the redevelopment plans are completed, providing the necessary relocation support for a new apartment by Gangnam standards, with no extra fees. Japel states that just the construction alone will cost 3 trillion won. If they offer that kind of support, families would earn 10 times the property's value. Taya asks if they're not there to negotiate, as he got the impression the man wanted to know about his plans for Qianhu's future. However, the old man denies that intention, saying he's there for another reason. His true interest lies in the protagonist's knowledge of the committee, the largest conglomerate in South Korea, controlling advanced industries and entertainment businesses across the country, Qiangu Corporation, the criminal organization behind the president's assassination, ranking members by skill, Ojang, the pseudo-religious group with the largest chamber, made up of all post-assassination presidents, the Eternal Life Sect, the largest crime syndicate composed of military elites and media moguls rejected by Oshang, the Dobang Association, and finally the committee's organizer, the Yan House of Changju. Since 1990, these 5 factions have overseen the country through the committee. The only thing they covet is balance, perfect balance, with power shared equally. Hearing this, Taha remains silent, a bit thoughtful. The protagonist says it seems they're afraid that Chang might disturb that balance. However, Japel assures that's not it and says the boy already knows the right answer. He asks if it was Chong who was responsible for his near-death experience, but the protagonist seems to hesitate for a moment, remembering when he faced Junsu, and the moment when the old man said it all ends here. Still, the boy claims it was Junsu. The man suddenly says Xiangu got Junsu, claiming that's what was said the moment they acknowledged his strength. A man of unknown origin, age, and identity, who became the president's bodyguard, saying Qianbu's presidency shines thanks to his light. This man first emerged through a coup, and although he fears believing it, perhaps Junsu is using the organization to feed his ambitions. Taeha asks what the man is looking for by telling him this. Leaning back, Jaepil assures that he must know, declaring he's sure the boy knows what he really wants. The protagonist assumes that maybe this man wants him to kill Chung and Junsu. Standing up, Vendetta thanks him for the cigar, warning that he'll take that as agreement on the district matter. The old man says that if someone outside the committee learns about him, the rule says he must be eliminated. With that, he asks the protagonist not to try running, assuring him that he wants to maintain the connection they have. The boy stops walking, encouraging Jaepil to look to the future and observe the next Qianbu Council meeting. Elsewhere, a fax arrives at an office. This was the 31st floor of Qiangu Electronics. One of the employees asks who could send a fax there, calmly reading the message that had been sent, surprised at what was written. Meanwhile, in a forest-like area near a waterfall, someone was running barefoot over the ground. It was Pyoto, a board member, trying to hide with the same message in his hands. Calling the vice president, the man informs him that Ingyu has announced he won't take part in the vote. The old man who was bathing stops in place, visibly irritated. The man says he sent a fax stating that a proxy will be present. The gruff man asks who the proxy would be. The street displayed protest banners, making it clear that entry into the building was restricted and that the residents would fight against the demolition. Inside the cafe, the preparation process was detailed, indicating that it involved an espresso machine and a preheated ceramic cup. For the beverage, a blend of Arabica and Robusta beans was used with a dark roast which was ground while the machine softly whirred. Then, drop by drop, a stronger strato coffee began to flow from the machine, the dark liquid dripping rhythmically into the cup. The coffee then filled the ceramic cup, and the light foam floating on the surface was a sign of a perfect result. Thus, he proudly presented the cups, explaining that it was an authentic Neapolitan ristretto, whose aroma spread through the room. A person wearing a cap with long hair observed the small cup in their bandaged hand attentively. Then they lifted the cup and took a small sip of the dark drink. The other customers in the cafe reacted with astonishment, finding the drink very hot and extremely bitter, while the indignant group asked if he expected them to drink that, complaining that their throats felt like they were on fire and questioning whether the intention was to kill them. He then explained that he usually had a shot of that drink before going to work to get more energy, and that they would soon get used to the taste. Even so, one of them commented that the drink was far too bitter, and jokingly asked if it was a crime to add sugar to coffee in Italy. Taeha, with his head slightly tilted, replied that it wasn't, and that they should have said if they wanted sugar, as he hadn't added any, which seemed to surprise the group. The person in the cap then said to forget it, stating they preferred something cold, and began politely asking to order an iced Americano. At that moment, Taeha interrupted, holding a knife in their direction, and asked if they were serious, to which the person in the cap sighed, questioning his seriousness. Outside, a narrow alley extended alongside the establishment with a few garbage bags and air conditioning units on the wall. Back inside the cafe, someone in the group asked how the negotiations had gone and what the current situation with Ojang was. Taeha looked to the side with a serious and thoughtful expression. The scene then shifted to an elegant cigar lounge where it was revealed that on that day, Jaepil Kim had accepted all the terms of the initial proposal. Displaced residents would be relocated at no cost, with free rent in the new apartments after redevelopment and no charges during construction. After the move, any property sale would have to go through a company appointed by Oshang, which would receive 50% of the profit based on the original property value. Taira reflected that the terms were unexpectedly better than he anticipated, although there was one caveat. Back at the cafe, Suri Un, the second-generation leader of the Yaburi gang, asked in surprise if he wanted her to step down from her position. Taeva confirmed that this had been the final condition presented by Jaepil Kim during the negotiation. In the lounge, Taeva's expression remained serious as he processed the information from that earlier conversation. During that conversation, Taeva had addressed Jaepil Kim, asking if he was referring to Miss Suri Un. Jaepil Kim then wanted to know if Taeha knew who had taught Suri Un to use custom-made wires as weapons in her fights. Taeva responded that although he didn't know the details, he was aware she had trained with someone before abruptly leaving. Jaepil Kim proposed one more condition. The leadership of the Yaburi gang should be transferred to Hworyang Lee. Taha, a little surprised by the demand, asked if it was an overstep to question the reason. Jaepil Kim explained that officially the reason was that communication with Hworyang would be easier for Ojang, but unofficially the story was different. He continues, saying it was a precautionary measure, albeit a small one, because after all, there was only one person in Korea who used that type of weapon. In the present at the cafe, a boy then asked who that person was and whether her mentor was really that renowned. She began by saying she wasn't very sure, but when a scout showed up with the offer, her father was quite surprised. The offer was to join the best group in the area, or something like that. Since they promised good pay, she ended up accepting as she felt stuck in a big house all day. Taiga, speaking of which, had something important to add. He believed it would be best for the Yaburi gang to be under Ojang's leadership. The other two were very surprised by the idea, one of them questioning what he was saying. He then stated that Jaepil Kim also agreed, and that although they would become a faction under Ojang in name only, in reality, they would be but he's cut off. Suri-un stood up quickly, strongly disagreeing. Despite her gratitude, she firmly refused the proposal, claiming that Ojang was responsible for her father's condition, and that they could not serve an enemy. He insisted that this was the only way to save her father. He continued reminding her that her father was still at the Chiengu hospital and his safety would be the first to be compromised once Chiengu noticed In Yu Hong's disappearance. Even so, she seemed reluctant and shaken by the situation. At that moment, footsteps approached and a voice asked them to do as he said, calling her chief. A group of men appeared, and the one with his arm in a sling declared that he believed it would be wise for them to also fall under Ojang's command. Surprised, she expressed concern, telling the newcomer that she had told him not to strain himself. He then argued that if they didn't join Ojang now, Chiengu would certainly return seeking revenge, and when that happened, it wouldn't be with mercenaries, but with their real forces, which would be very dangerous. Taeha looked at the man who mentioned Chienbu's security. His eyes showed focus on what was being said. The man continued, explaining that for 3 years much blood had been spilled, and no one, neither parents, friends, nor neighbors, had been safe. He added that even knowing Disayab was alive in Chiengu Hospital, no one dared speak up, fearing he'd be harmed. He stated that he would fight, and if he died trying, at least he would know he tried. But he was worried about his daughter and had a small favor to ask. Then, addressing the chief, he said the neighborhood's strength didn't come from Giziab or anyone else, but from her, who protected and led them. Everyone bowed in respect, and he thanked her for everything she had done. He warned her that she had a lot to lose if she betrayed them. Tears welled up in her eyes at those words. Suri-un wiped her face and adjusted her cap, telling him not to be so dramatic. She agreed with the decision and, smiling, invited everyone to have a drink. Someone cheerfully suggested they go to the Bowman restaurant and that they needed tables outside. Meanwhile, Taeha watched the group from a distance, thoughtful. He placed the cup on the table, stating that with Im Yu Hong's fingerprints secured, entering the council meeting would no longer be a problem. Confident, he thought it was now his turn to claim victory, and that Chang should just wait. The car sped up as someone inside asked whether Director In Yu Hong's whereabouts had been discovered. Director Piotr Jang, a board member and supporter of the vice president, wanted to know if there were any updates on the situation. A woman on the phone reported that unfortunately, they still hadn't found him and that the PR and HR departments at headquarters were working together to locate him. However, he hadn't been found at his residence, and it was reported that 2 lions the director kept there were found shot dead. Shocked, Director Piotr Jang asked if the lions had really been shot, and the person on the phone confirmed that yes, that seemed to be the case. The woman went on, revealing that they had also been contacted by the Ojang faction, who informed them that Director Hong had moved forward with the redevelopment plans. In Jiangsu's 3rd district, Ojang claimed a breach of the armistice and declared full control of the redevelopment, taking Piotr Jang by surprise. He wondered what the hell was going on, thinking that Director Hong was an unqualified man appointed only due to Chang Jin's favor. He couldn't understand how he had disappeared so recklessly and began to suspect murder, fearing the consequences for his representative. Suddenly, someone called him Pyodo, startling him into stammering, Vice President. The Vice President of the Chiengu Group, Huang Yuyang, a board member, asked to be reminded again of the name of Director Hong's representative. The scene shifted to the city of Chiengu, to a building in the Uido neighborhood, Yangdongpo district, where Chienbu's headquarters were located. Director In Yu Hong, a supporter of Chang Jin and visibly injured, mentioned that the board meeting would be held on the 60th floor. Taeha, accompanying him, confirmed this and asked whether the board consisted of those 15 members, correct? Director In Yu Hong remained silent, visibly tense. A knife was pressed against his neck and he stammered, confirming that yes, that was correct. The young man reminded In Yu Hong that he wasn't being kept alive just to extract information. He already had enough. He was simply verifying what he knew. Confused, the director asked why then and what it was he wanted from him. His captor said he wanted nothing, to which the others, surprised, questioned that response. He explained that even if In Yu Hong returned to the board, he would be ruined once it was revealed he had handed Jiangsu over to Ojang, especially since he was appointed by Chang Jin. The young man said that having lost Chang's favor, all he had left was death, and urged him to reflect on what he needed to do to survive. With that, he turned and began to walk away, his footsteps echoing. The young man turned his head when he heard the question about whether he was just leaving. A group was waiting for him. Suri asked if he was really going to leave without saying goodbye, especially with In Yu Hong tied up like that. He responded that despite appearances, In Yu Hong was still a director at Chiengu and useful for holding off any counterattacks from Ojang against the redevelopment plans. But with a slight smile, he added that if his presence ever became intolerable, all they had to do was call, and he'd take care of it. He then turned to one of the men in the group waiting for him. The silver-haired man asked about the promise he made, wanting to know if he intended to keep it. A memory came to the young man's mind when he had asked Gray if he didn't want to step into a bigger arena. He touched Gray's shoulder and warned him that Chiengu might cause trouble, asking him to endure until things stabilized. The woman and the other man said their goodbyes, thanking him for everything. Taya thanked them in return, saying it had been a pleasure and said, "See you soon." The scene changed to a long, empty runway under a clear sky. Two men were talking on the runway, one asking if the other had heard that Director Hong would have a representative, and the other confirming it. One of them noticed the other had started smoking again, and he simply confirmed it. The first man commented that he was jealous, saying he couldn't even chew gum without being scolded, to which the other replied that he talked too much. A young man blowing a bubble of gum remarked that that was why they should have been given a raise when they asked nicely. Junyo Kwan, an executive bodyguard from Chinbu Security, asked what they thought. Would they probably support the vice president? A bespectacled, distressed man protested that this was not what he was promised and asked them to reconsider his transfer. Yao Min-mun, another executive bodyguard, said maybe, but it didn't matter. They just had to follow the captain. Supporters of both Chang Jin and the vice president were clearly present, and Mr. Jin was confident of victory with the support of 7 board members. Junyo Kwan continued, stating that if Director Hong's representative was indeed that man, then it would be up to the 2 neutral members to decide who would assume the presidency. The plane landed heavily, and he commented that he was surprised that the newcomer, who had previously been inactive, now held all the control. The other man agreed, adding that that person now held the key to their future. As the plane taxied, it was explained that Shinbu Security was the main force responsible for protecting the organization, with clearly defined powers. It was also detailed that members of this force only obeyed the orders of Junsa Bake and were prohibited from engaging in commercial activities within Chingu. However, footsteps were heard as it was clarified that members of Chinbu Security with exceptional intellect, power, and political vision could, exceptionally, join the board. At that moment, Du Gaiyan Han, one of Chingu's directors and the official successor of Jumsu Bak, also a neutral board member, descended the stairs. Although technically just a board member, he had Junsu Bak's full favor and served as an idol for the entire security team. His eyes remained serious and focused as he looked ahead. The 2 men waiting for him bowed deeply, showing their gratitude for his trip there. In front of him, a line of uniformed men stood in formation as all of Chinbu Security formally assembled to receive him as Director Han. The scene then moved to the South Sea in South Korea, where a boat slid under the bright sun. A woman with scars on her back remarked that he must have been in a hurry to come by helicopter, and that if he had contacted her earlier, she could have met him herself. Casually, he replied that it was fine, since whoever had unfinished business with the other was the one who should make the visit, then changed the subject. A large striped marlin was hanging, and he commented that it looked to weigh almost 900 pounds, asking if it was really caught with just a spear. She replied that the fish was well known among local divers, famous for being a bully that tore up fishing nets and caused all sorts of trouble. Meanwhile, a woman watched from the boat. The Yen family of Changju, founders of the board, had existed for hundreds of years. With her legs marked by cross-hatched scars, she explained that in Chiangu, her role on the board was to supervise the other factions and maintain the balance of power. Harem Yen, one of Chiangu's directors and also a neutral board member, offered raw fish and drinks to the guests. Little was known about her organization composed of women whose strength and skills rivaled those of the 10 most powerful in Ojan. Smiling, the visitor politely declined the offer due to lack of time and said he had come to ask if she was already aware of the situation involving Director In Yuhan. She promptly replied that yes, she was aware. She then mentioned having heard that his representative was a man named Suyup Jin, a name well known by all. A memory surfaced, revealing the 3rd son of the late President Suko Jin, who had died 17 years ago. The visitor questioned how the representative could be someone who was already dead. Clenching his fist, he wondered if it might be a ghost, but soon concluded that in fact someone had become a monster and was now making a return. He then declared that he was there to formally request that the board issue a bounty for the man responsible for the murder of his family. He wanted him dead, and the bounty was set at 20 billion won. The story returns to 17 years in the past. Guo Jin, the eldest son of Chairman Suko Jin, ran while asking his father to wait a minute under the watchful gaze of a woman. At that moment, a man questioned why Suyuk was even considered his son, saying the least he could do was give an explanation before leaving. The other son agreed, insisting that their father say something before he left, right as the car door slammed shut. Suko Jin, founder of the Chianbu group, replied by asking if he needed their permission to do whatever he wanted. Despite their protests and pleas, he called them insolent brats, cutting off any possibility of dialogue. As the vehicles drove away to the sound of engines, one of the sons commented that despite everything, their father really was impressive. Suyuk, the 3rd son, reflected on how inconsiderate the patriarch was, especially toward those who accompanied him on this sudden trip. Everything was done impulsively, and now he had to deal with the eldest brother's reaction. The woman resigned, said what was done, suggesting they buy a painting to ease the situation upon return, since the brother liked those kinds of gifts. However, Taka, then only 10 years old, rejected the idea, saying it might be misunderstood and make him even more upset. Soon after, the creaking of a gate marked the arrival of the cars. Surya thought to himself that this was undoubtedly a headache, regretting that their father hadn't at least kept his world tour a secret. The convoy moved through the gate as the engine sounds echoed across the estate. From the back seat, Teo watched the scene in surprise, staring through the window at what was unfolding before his eyes. Men bowed in reverence, calling for President Jin and wishing him a safe return. Despite the display, the chairman said he had already asked them not to do that, reminding them they were all executives on their own merit. He only asked that they take care of the company and avoid making rash decisions until he returned. Guo responded with disdain, muttering unfriendly remarks about those present. As the car passed over a bump, Suyeok observed the men and commented that they didn't even bother pretending to be discreet anymore. Turning to Taiha, he asked him to pay close attention to what was happening. He explained that most of those people had been saved by their grandfather, and because of that, had gotten to where they were. Over time, many had become loyal followers, drawn in by the founder's undeniable charisma. Some even made spontaneous oaths of loyalty, never expecting anything in return. He mentioned that these people were known as loyalists, and he was convinced they would also be useful to Taha in the future. The narrative shifted to a bustling street, lined with shops under the orange sky of late afternoon. Pedestrians walked with rhythmic steps along the sidewalk, marking the flow of daily life. The location was the city of Yongin in Gyeonggi province. While walking, he thought about the old loyalists and wondered if any were still active within Cheongu. He explained to Gray that these were individuals who had pledged loyalty exclusively to his grandfather, and now tried to imagine if even one of them was still around. Gray asked him to wait a moment, saying he would take a look through the files his father had left, typing swiftly on the keyboard. He asked if any names came to mind. While searching through the files on the many monitors in front of him, he muttered to himself, "Not there either, and not there." Gray, surprised, asked if he really remembered all the names after all this time. The answer was simple. There were fewer than 20, so it was easy to keep track. Even so, Gray continued the search but confessed he wasn't finding anything relevant. This only confirmed what he had already suspected. He felt disheartened imagining that maybe there was no one left. He remembered that all the loyalists had sworn allegiance only to his grandfather and assumed Guo probably hadn't spared any of them. Then Gray, with a spark of excitement, said he had found something. However, he found it strange that the records were still active in the personnel database since the man in question was retired. He said a bar was registered under the man's name, located precisely in Yongin, and that he would retrieve the address. Shortly after, the pub door slid open softly. As he entered, he was greeted with a friendly smile by a man behind the counter, who welcomed him warmly. Taya asked what the house specialty was, and the attendant responded, gesturing that the menu was just behind him. With confidence, he assured him they only served the best and suggested fresh mackerel that had arrived that day. He accepted the suggestion without hesitation and ordered a portion. Then the attendant asked if he'd like a drink. The customer preferred to decide after eating, responding with a slight smile. The other man smiled back, mentally processing the order for a moment. Then he picked up the fish and slammed it hard onto the cutting board. On the other side of the counter, keen eyes followed every movement as a large, gleaming knife was deftly wielded. It was then that the seated young man asked when the real owner, Wang Sugu, would appear that day. The attendant responded with a relaxed smile, asking who exactly he meant, then claiming that he himself was the owner. The answer, however, was immediately challenged. According to the visitor, that wasn't true. Confused, the man behind the counter wanted to understand what exactly that meant. The other, maintaining a firm gaze, admitted he wasn't an expert in raw fish, and then paused deliberately. He then pointed out that the knife being used wasn't suitable for slicing fish, suggesting the disguise could have been more convincing. Before any reply could be made, the attendant lunged with a sudden strike. At that very moment, a blade appeared to block the attack, producing a metallic clang. The impact was so strong that the tip of the larger knife broke off. Surprised, he wondered if that smaller blade had really caused such damage. The young man jumped back just as the pub door opened. An older man entered, scolding Hyunbin for leaving the lights on and worrying about the electric bill. However, upon seeing the scene before him, he froze confused. The attendant, clearly alarmed, shouted at him to leave immediately, calling the other an intruder and vowing to handle it alone. Meanwhile, the older man kept his eyes fixed on the scene, trying to grasp what was happening. With a slight smile, the man in the suit greeted him calmly, saying it had been a while since they last met. At that moment, a memory surfaced. In the image from the past, the young man appeared beside that same older man, listening attentively as he spoke about the loyalists. Inside a car, he revealed that his bodyguard, Wang Su, was also one of the loyalists. The other man, visibly flattered, replied that compared to the others, he was still just getting started. At the time, he made it clear that his only wish was to serve the young master the best way he could. The present hit hard as Wang Su's face, now in the restaurant, revealed deep emotion. Tears streamed down his face as he fell to his knees. On the floor, the drops marked his overwhelming emotion. He expressed immense relief at seeing him alive and well. He concluded, his voice choked, by respectfully calling him young master Taya. In the background, the attendant watched the scene stunned. The scene shifted to a quiet, organized office bathed in the soft light of dusk. Wang Su invited the young master to come in, saying the place was small, but that he was truly grateful to have him there. He then asked if the young master was the one who attacked the Chiansu annex, praising him for doing what no one else dared and calling him remarkable as he casually tossed something aside. The young man admitted that he failed since Sean Jin was still alive after all. While hanging up his coat, the older man asked who the boy at the bar was, and the young man replied that he was his apprentice. He explained that he currently worked as a blacksmith in his spare time and that after 8 years, the apprentice was finally starting to show promise. The young master commented that the apprentice's knife had almost cut his own even without using any special technique, and that he had never seen such a sharp blade before. Guangsu said he was being too kind, but assumed that his past experiences had helped him a lot in that kind of work as he tossed something into the trash. The memory of the abrupt entrance into the bar resurfaced, with the young man jumping back while Guangsu scolded Hyunbin about the lights and the electric bill. Back in the office, Guangsu asked again with conviction if the young master was the one who attacked the Qiangu annex. The young man noticed he had thrown the bill away without even looking and wondered why as he unfolded the paper he had picked up. He looked at the contents with a surprised expression. His eyes locked onto the paper, absorbing the information. As a door mechanism activated, Guangsu said, "Anyway, young master." Guangsu Gu, former vice president of Qinbu Security, then asked what the young master had been doing all these years. After a pause, the young man answered darkly, "Execution." The camera focused on the trash bin full of crumpled papers, including what looked like a bill. He then clarified that he had been busy killing those who had betrayed his family, showing a wanted poster with his photo and a large bounty. 17 years earlier, a man sat alone in a dark room waiting. Suddenly, a door opened with a loud creak, revealing darkness on the other side. Another man entered and pulled up a chair, noting that Guangsu seemed to have seen better days. Guo Jin, the eldest son of the president of the Qingu group, found it pitiful to see him like that. As Guo Jin mentioned that the funeral for his father, Suyuk, and his family had gone smoothly, Guangsu collapsed onto the table. Guo continued, explaining that they came up with a story claiming Guangsu wasn't on the yacht because he was caring for his sick mother. Guangsu suddenly stood up, furious, and told the other to shut up, accusing him of being responsible for everything. He listed the firing of the caretaker and the disappearance of his mother, asking if Guo Jin thought he wouldn't notice the plan to keep him off the yacht. Guo Jin calmly replied that regardless of what was said, the fact remained that Guangsu wasn't on the yacht, though there was proof Suyuk had invited him. Guangsu then asked, his face tense, if he had misunderstood the other's intentions. Guo Jin said he didn't want to blame him because he understood that family comes first, while making a small gesture with his hand. He assured Guangsu that nothing would happen to him or his mother, and sliding over a notepad and pen, asked him to write. Leaning forward, he asked who among the loyalists still remained. He knew the group of loyalists was larger than the ones who had bowed at the gate that day. Guo Jin urged him to write, revealing those who would refuse to serve him, but Guangsu's gaze was resolute. Seeing the hesitation, Guo Jin turned to the other man in the room, Junsu, and asked where his loyalty lay, while Guangsu appeared to waver. Junsu replied that Guo Jin already knew the answer. He served only Qiangu and Qiangu alone. Sometime later, Guangsu, now older, asked a young master if he was saying he had become an assassin. The young man confirmed it, saying he punished those who had betrayed his family. Guangsu, with a slight smile, supposed that might include him too. After all, he had stayed away instead of boarding the yacht with Master Suyuk that day, and his hand clenched tightly. The young master gripped his weapon, stating that there were no excuses for traitors, and quickly readied it. His gaze was intense and locked onto the man before him. Guangsu stepped forward, prepared for what was to come. With a swift motion, he delivered a powerful strike toward the young man. The young man was shocked to see his blade had shattered on impact. Guangsu smiled, remarking that it was a shame the young man's blade wasn't in good condition. The young man quickly removed his coat, preparing to fight without it. The coat flew through the air as he moved swiftly to the side. Guangsu threw another fast punch, but the target was already gone. The young man leaped over him with astonishing speed, surprising Guangsu. Looking up, Guangsu admitted that it was truly remarkable. Even in low light, the young man's switch from using a weapon to fighting bare-handed was seamless. His speed was incredible, making Guangsu wonder how many battles he'd already been through. The young man's face showed his full concentration on the fight. Guangsu, meanwhile, smiled mysteriously throughout the fight. He recalled an old moment, saying that as Guangsu Gu, he would face the young master with pleasure, no matter how many times he came after him, while embracing him tightly. The scene shifted back to the room where Guangsu now sat alone. He placed a bottle on the table, speaking of the Solerno family and saying that now he understood. He remembered that after the deaths of Master Suyuk and the president on the yacht, a massive purge began. Guo Jin eliminated all those loyal to the former president, yet Guangsu was somehow spared. The young man asked why, and Guangsu explained that it was simply to use him as bait. At the time, Guo Jin was convinced there were still more loyalists inside Qingu, so he decided to spare Guangsu, believing that any survivors would eventually come to him. But after 17 years, it seemed everyone had forgotten. He imagined the young master might be wondering why, of all people, Guo Jin chose him. Out of all the loyalists, all those who could have been used as bait. It was brother Junsu who had intervened on his behalf back then. The name Junsu Bake made the young master pause and reflect. The young man said that on the day of the yacht incident, he had received something from his grandfather while searching under a chair. He was to deliver it to a director named In-soo Kim, a lawyer. But since he too betrayed the family, the young man had to deal with him himself. Then he placed a fountain pen on the table and asked Wang-soo if he recognized it. Wang-soo was visibly shocked to see the object. The young master pressed on, asking who the remaining members of the loyalist group were. A memory returned to the old interrogation room, where Guho Jin asked how long Wang-soo planned to remain loyal, mentioning that even lawyer Kim had switched sides. Guho Jin said that kind of loyalty wasn't noble and that no one was left to appreciate it. In the memory, Wang-soo slammed his head against the table in despair. The sounds of his skull hitting the wood echoed as Guho Jin and Junsu watched. Back then, Junsu had told Guangsu to stop that nonsense. Covered in blood, Guangsu asked if he should give up and surrender like Junsu had, while droplets of blood hit the floor. He screamed that Qiangu was the president's dream, the man who had given him a chance, and asked how Junsu could suggest betraying him. Through tears and ragged breaths, Guangsu said it was impossible, and that he'd rather die than betray the president in such a way. The image showed the scars on his head, a reminder of that day. Back in the present, Wangsu remarked that after 17 years, not many would remember that fountain pen. Still, he declared that as long as he lived, he would continue to follow the president's wishes. Then Wangsu asked the young master to become the next president of Qiangu. Director Myong-jae Kim of Qiangu Electronics adjusted his glasses, stating that 3 of the 6 board members who supported the vice president were at risk. They were served by department heads, each with at least 20 years of experience. But with their superiors refusing to step down, tensions were rising. With those greedy old men refusing to retire, Director Chon Jin, also on the board, thought it was no wonder the group was falling apart. He ordered his assistant to schedule a dinner with the department heads, believing that after so many years of service, they would have secrets about their superiors. A shoe tapped lightly on the floor as someone approached them. Xiao Jin greeted the arriving director, saying it was good to see him. A group of older men was approaching, and one of them asked how he was that morning. The vice president of Qiangu, Wang Huyang, said he had a matter to discuss and asked for a moment of his time. Xiao Jin responded with a smile that he was quite busy, as one could see, and asked that everything be sent by email later. He added with a touch of sarcasm that despite them all being old, surely someone among them could manage to write an email. The vice president insisted that if he was busy, they would keep the discussion brief. Right there, his foot stamped the floor firmly. A woman in a suit stepped between them, her hands clasped in front. She apologized but requested that the vice president refrain from approaching, as Mr. Bake had ordered no confrontations before the board meeting. Myong-jae Kim noted that although the vice president was the boss, even he had to follow Mr. Baek's orders, since Qiangu's security had taken Chon Jin's side. However, the vice president took another step forward, ignoring the warning. A woman, nervous, said that if the vice president came any closer, she would have no choice. Her face showed apprehension as she hesitated, not finishing the sentence. The vice president, with a furious close-up look, harshly ordered her to get out of the way. His eye conveyed restrained rage as he began to insult her, calling her a brat. His imposing presence visibly frightened her as she looked up. At that moment, Chon Jin appeared behind the vice president, cutting through the tension. He asked what kind of bodyguard was shaken like that and informed the woman that her pay would be docked for 3 months. The bodyguard lowered her head, seeming to accept the reprimand silently. Myong-jae Kim thought about the overwhelming presence of the vice president as imposing as that of Mr. Bak. He reflected that Wang Huyang was a small giant, but powerful, and understood why neither the founding president nor Guo Jin had managed to topple him. The vice president smiled slightly, looking at Chon Jin. He said that on a personal level, he was very grateful to Chon Jin, because by eliminating not only the loyalist faction but also Guo Jin's, Chon Jin had allowed him to take the presidency of Qiangu after 37 years. He then mentioned the man for whom Chon Jin had offered a reward 3 days earlier, the assailant behind the Jin family massacre, and the one who severed his Achilles tendon. With a wide grin, the vice president commented that he'd heard they wanted him dead, but he was curious to hear his story if captured alive. Kyung Jin replied that he had already met him and sent someone for the 20 billion won reward, giving the vice president an ultimatum to resign or die. He then turned to leave, leaving the vice president behind. The vice president laughed scornfully, repeating, 37 years? The scene shifted to the front of a pub called Fresh Liquor Pub. Inside, Guangsu seemed surprised and asked the young master if he wanted him to forge a blade. The young master requested, ideally, a blade so firm that it would withstand anything without ever breaking, and asked if that was possible. A chef at the counter commented that it was all because the young master's knife almost broke Guangsu, and bragged that he could now make excellent blades. Guangsu scolded the chef, telling him not to get cocky just because he knew how to sharpen metal and to focus on properly slicing fish, reminding him that mackerel must be cut against the grain. Turning to the young master, Guangsu asked if the request was because of brother Junsu. The young man confirmed, explaining that Junsu had managed to break his knife with his bare hands after all. He admitted that although he had seen a lot in his line of work, That was the first time he had ever witnessed something like it. Guangsu commented that using the young man's father's name as proxy for the next board meeting was a brilliant move, sure to stir things up in the boardroom. Master Teha remarked that if Guan Yuyang were still like before, he would have reprimanded Chan Jin, since his greed was so great that even his grandfather had a hard time controlling him. Guangsu added that if Teha could make it into the board meeting amid that turbulent power struggle, his mere presence could change the game as a witness. That would be proof of Chan Jin's despicable actions and coup, stripping him of any chance to win a seat on the board or claim the presidency. The young master's gloved hand reached across the table as he confirmed that that was the plan. However, he stated that regardless of how things played out, he needed to confront Junsu Bak, the man who commands Qiangu's security forces. Guangsu poured himself a drink, deep in thought. He took a sip and asked the young master whether he believed he'd win when he faced him again. Taya replied that frankly, it wasn't about winning. It was a duty he needed to fulfill. With a grim expression, he declared that every last traitor who hurt and betrayed his family would die by his hand, no exceptions. The chef behind the counter listened to the conversation silently. Master Teya added that honestly, it wasn't like it was his first time facing a monster of that caliber. Guangsu tapped his chopsticks on the table with satisfaction and promised that, as a member of the Loyalist faction, he would forge a blade so remarkable that even his brother Junsu would be left speechless. The young master thanked him, stood up, and said he would stay elsewhere for now, asking to be contacted once the blade was ready. The doorbell rang as he left the pub and stepped onto the street. Someone observed him from afar and said, "Ooh, nice there he is," as Taha walked along the sidewalk. He paused for a moment, as if sensing something strange. A man in a cap approached, saying he was the one with the 20 billion won bounty and needed to come with him. Taha wondered if it was a bounty hunter, surprised it hadn't even been a day since the reward was announced. He began to ask who told them where he'd be, but was interrupted by a swift movement and a hissing sound. Suddenly, he was struck hard by an attack from above, throwing him to the ground with a loud crash. The impact was so strong it echoed down the street with several booms. The assassin duo, batter and thrower, regretted tossing the victim out, as they needed him alive. The batter replied that it wasn't his hit that sent him flying. He explained that Taha had launched himself to counter the force his body would absorb, as dust from the impact began to settle. Back in the pub, Guangsu heard the noise outside and asked what that sound was, looking worried. Suddenly, he felt a sharp stab and shouted, "Young master," realizing he had been stabbed. The tip of a blade appeared near his glasses, embedded in his head. Chan Jin smiled maliciously and asked, 37 years? So what about it? He continued, saying it wasn't about how long it took, but about tenacity, old man. Wounded, Guangsu held the chef from behind as a hostage. With his neck cracking, he asked if Chan Jin had any idea how much he had prepared and who he had positioned for each scenario. He mentioned the greatest assassin, who had pretended to be a fool for years to fight for the honor of succeeding Junsu Bake, with a sinister glint in his eyes. Guangsu, still holding the hostage, asked in shock what Chan Jin had just done. The latter simply smiled, revealing that he had coated the blade with Bushmaster venom. He stated it wouldn't be lethal, but the pain would be so intense Guangsu would wish he were dead, so he'd best stay down. Stunned, Guangsu stammered as he realized something terrifying about his assailant. Chan Jin then mentioned the vice president of the Qianhu Special Operations Division, asking if the name sounded familiar. He explained it was the unofficial unit created by Junsu Bake to mold a worthy successor. In the end, Du Han was chosen and the rest were supposedly eliminated. However, Chan Jin thought it a waste to discard such talent. In a country with few natural resources, he believed it was essential to make the most of its people. With that, he made his final offer, that the vice president resigned, promising him peace for the rest of his days. Otherwise, he should find someone strong enough to face Junsu Bak. Known as Nameless, the former No-4 member of the Qianhu division, noted that although they had known each other for a long time, this was the first time they truly faced off. In a swift move, the chef hurled Guangsu across the restaurant. With a trembling hand, Guangsu recognized the poison, Bushmaster, a viper famed for its powerful neurotoxic effects. He questioned whether Qiangu had really sent someone to watch over him after his departure, and whether that man had been at his side all these years in disguise. The red-haired man confirmed he'd been placed there indefinitely, with one condition to complete his mission. In order to leave, he had to. Before he could finish, Guangsu, seized by fury, charged with a shout. The goal was to locate the last remaining loyalists. Quickly, the attacker reacted and slashed him with the blade. Confused, Guangsu couldn't understand how the enemy had moved so fast. He had been right in front of him just seconds before. Before he could respond, he was struck again, this time stunned and defenseless. Without remorse, the attacker commented that he didn't want to hit him the same way twice, but shrugged as if it didn't matter. Then, with a dark grin, he announced it was time to go after the young master's head. Outside, a crash and explosion shattered the day's calm. One of the bounty hunters, known as the Pitcher, shouted that there were no eliminations or runners on base, launching steel balls at high speed. Running swiftly, the young master dodged the blasts caused by the projectiles. It was hard to believe someone could throw with such power and precision. It wasn't impossible to escape, but it required extreme effort. Meanwhile, the batter prepared to hit one of the metal spheres with his bat. Shouting "home run incoming," he smashed the ball with monstrous force. Flying at high speed, the projectile nearly struck him. The real threat was the coordinated sequence of attacks. He thought that, with a knife in hand, he might have already ended it. Seeing Taha dodge, the batter remarked that the 20 billion won bounty made sense. Only someone among Ozhong's top 10 could evade his strike. Getting closer, the pitcher suggested Taha surrender while they were still being reasonable, promising to spare his life. Ironically, the young man replied that it was a noble gesture, considering the aggressive use of a bat from the very start. Laughing, the batter asked if his partner really thought a polite request would be enough as both advanced. He added that for players like them, actions spoke louder than words. If they wanted to be heard, they should first take him down. Finally, the pitcher revealed that some had hired them to capture him alive, others to kill him. They'd be paid either way, but perhaps Teo would prefer being taken alive. The young master stared at the wanted poster, wondering if they truly wanted him alive and whether these men might be tied to Chong Jin. At that moment, the red-haired assassin appeared silently behind him, ready to strike. With an agile move, the young man managed to dodge the swift blow. Surprised by the evasion, the assassin spun his weapon in the air as if assessing his opponent more carefully. The bounty hunters reacted instantly. The batter, irritated, shouted, asking who the hell this guy was and how he dared interfere with their goods. Unfazed, the young man turned and asked the newcomer's identity. Smiling wryly, the red-haired man replied that he hoped he noticed, declaring himself the assassin sent to kill him. The pitcher scoffed, mocking that another disgusting cockroach had decided to show up. At this, the batter sighed and said there was no other choice. They'd have to deal with both now. Without wasting time, the pitcher again declared, "No outs, runner on first, pitch," preparing another shot. However, before he could complete the move, the assassin precisely sliced his arm, mocking the baseball chatter. Screaming in pain, the pitcher clutched his wound. With disdain, the assassin ordered him to disappear, calling him a cockroach. Staggering, the man collapsed screaming, while the batter watched in shock, calling his name. Consumed with rage, the batter raised his bat high, hurling insults at the attacker. But with a swift, precise slash, the assassin struck him down. Impatient, he told him to shut up, calling him a swollen larva. He added that he was in a good mood, so the others should stop screaming and disappear as his partner's body fell. The young man approached, watching the scene closely. Then he recognized the clothing and realized it was the apprentice from the pub. Confused, he asked if he had been in disguise and wanted to know what had happened to his mentor. The assassin laughed and said he was probably already dead. After all, a dose of the venom usually led most to their deathbed, and he'd taken two. The young man's hand clenched tightly upon hearing that. He wanted to know if he was acting under Chong Jun's orders and if he had been sent to track down the remaining loyalists. With a nod, the assassin confirmed and said he'd been rotting in that mission, but the young man's arrival had saved him from that miserable fate. Mocking the loyalist faction, he called it an imaginary enemy, explaining that he'd endured everything with patience, waiting for a single opportunity. And now that chance was before him, to kill Du Gyung-han and take Jumsu Bak's place, the traitor. He said this as he launched his attack. The young master met the charge with a firm and determined expression. At the same time, a memory surfaced. The vice president, alone in his office, deep in thought. In it, Chong Jin smiled, challenging him to find someone capable of facing Jumsu Bak. The vice president, still in the memory, smirked in contempt, considering Chong Jin a fool whose naivety knew no bounds. He doubted that he could have placed someone powerful enough under their noses unnoticed. He thought it impossible. He concluded then that Jumsu Bak had pretended not to notice on purpose, deeming the act so pathetic it didn't deserve a response, as it concerned the second in command. Back in the present, the young master's eyes narrowed, locked on the approaching opponent. Reflected in his dilated pupil was the assassin's leap, teeth clenched. However, with surprising calm, he called out for Guangsu and asked for a knife. From inside the pub, the wounded Guangsu hurled himself through the window, which shattered into pieces. Even covered in blood, he managed to help one last time, holding the remaining knives. The assassin crashed into the protagonist's ally, shattering him with the impact. A massive explosion of smoke and debris filled the street where he had fallen. Quickly, the young master grabbed two of the knives Guangsu had thrown, one in each hand. Severely wounded, Guangsu murmured a few words in a low voice. The boy replied that he understood and told him to rest for a bit. With a final effort, Guangsu collapsed to the ground, motionless. The opponent emerged from the shadows, leaping toward him with a smile. He mocked him, saying it wasn't the time for distractions. With a swift strike, he hurled the young man down the street, slamming him hard. Sitting on the ground, he recovered from the impact. Brushing the dust off his clothes, he remarked that the loyalists were truly impressive, since Guangsu had received enough poison to kill most people. Even so, he couldn't believe how quickly he responded to the call for a knife. The enemy asked if he was jealous, implying that Guangsu treated him better than he ever had in all those years. He denied it, stepping on one of the fallen knives and breaking it, saying only that he was surprised to see him still standing. The ground cracked under his feet from the pressure. He continued, saying it didn't matter anyway, as Guangsu would be dead soon regardless, while the streetlight pole fell toward him. He looked up, surprised to see the object knocked down by the enemy. The pole crashed down with a bang, destroying part of the street and a built-in facade. cut electrical cables, sparked and crackled on the ground. One of them whipped dangerously close to him. Nearby traffic lights began flickering erratically. People screamed, wondering what was happening and who was causing such destruction again. Holding a cleaver, the assassin asked if he was any good at tap dancing as he quickly approached. The two clashed amidst the sparking wires, their blades clanging with metallic sounds. The enemy commented that, according to Chong Jin, the young master didn't even land a single blow on Junsu Baek before fleeing. Even so, he shamelessly wanted to come back to face them, questioning where all that confidence came from. One of the wires continued to spark near them. To avoid the electrified cable, he leaped onto the rooftop of a building. He was closely followed by the adversary, who mocked his pathetic weakness. With a powerful blow, he hurled him against the side of a building, causing a thunderous crash. He slid along the dark hallway floor, recognizing his opponent's strength. He prepared for the next attack, which came swiftly from behind. Their blades clashed repeatedly, creating sparks in the darkness. He thought he couldn't understand this enemy. It was as if he were teleporting, always one step ahead with astonishing speed. Yet the attacks themselves were slow enough to be countered. He remembered how the assassin had acted undercover for years, fooling even him with his supposed incompetence. And yet, he wielded a sharp blade. So why use poison? Gripping his knives, he readied himself again. He asked the enemy if he truly understood what it meant to be a killer. In a memory, he asked someone, feet up on the table, if they were talking about assassins. The person explained that many think they're the same, but they're not. One's hired. He claimed that in assassination, it's better to trust science. Explosives, poison, drones, options are endless. Besides, hiring such a service would be very expensive. He also said that assassins not only eliminate the target, but make sure no trace is left behind. He commented that it sounded like his style of work, but he was reprimanded, told his methods were messy. Who in their right mind paints a wall of blood? Then he deduced the recent job was a setup. The person confirmed it. The client wanted both the target and him dead. A common government tactic to kill two birds with one stone. But they raise a question. What if there was someone who always eliminated targets without leaving a trace? What would happen to the organization that had such a person? The thought worried him. With an assassin like that, they would have tremendous power in their hands. Back in the fight, he thought that if this man truly was an assassin, everything made sense. His movements didn't compare to normal speed. They felt like a magician vanishing and reappearing with purpose. If he had knocked down the pole on purpose to lure him there into the dark, then this was a plan, not a coincidence. The assassin smiled, repeating that he had been saved from that miserable fate. He returned the smile, understanding why Chong Jin and Junsu Baek had left him to rot for years. They wanted to create an assassin, but due to his chaotic way of acting like a killer, they gave up on him. The enemy's eyes widened in rage at those words. In another memory, still young and wearing a tracksuit, the assassin was being reprimanded. He took a blow, falling to the gym floor. He begged to continue, saying he still wanted to fight. Junsu Baek refused, saying he had seen enough and was disappointed. He told him to focus on his strengths and said it was frustrating to see him distracted by the unattainable. Do-gyeon Han, with a cold expression, declared he would never become someone like him. The young man screamed for him to shut up, asking what he even knew. In the present, the rival was called a coward who had fooled with his tail between his legs and was questioned on who he thought he was to speak like that. Furious, the assassin shouted that he would make him eat those words, promising to take his head back and make everyone recognize him again as he charged forward. A blade cut through the air with speed. He ran down a dark corridor, determined. Suddenly, he sensed something was wrong and called out to wait. A gloved hand pressed the elevator button to close the doors. He was told that he had already been given many chances, but he simply didn't see what he was fighting against. With a determined gaze, the young master declared, "It's my turn now." Hey everyone, did you enjoy this story? I really liked it. If you want to follow the next part, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next story, guys.